or tablet or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narinda.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up today, the UK economy needs to wean itself off cheap foreign workers. That's the message from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, speaking to business leaders at the Confederation of British Industry's annual conference this morning. Well, Sir Keir said he appreciated the need for skilled foreign workers, but added that having proper control of our borders was an immediate benefit of Brexit. Energy firms have been failing vulnerable customers, the sector's watchdog has warned, as people start counting the cost of staying warm this coming winter. Ofgem has told all 17 firms in its review they had to improve. With Good Energy, Outfox, So Energy, True Energy and Utilities are being told they had severe weaknesses. We'll be analysing what they all need to do to be keeping everyone warm this winter. And Justice Secretary Dominic Raab under yet more scrutiny after being accused of using offensive language towards colleagues. He's now set to face MPs at a committee hearing at 2:30. We'll be there live. Will there be any tomatoes flying across the room this time? But before that, let's get the latest news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon. 2 minutes past 12. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The UK must wean itself off immigration dependency. That's the message from the Labour leader to business bosses. Sir Keir Starmer told the Confederation of Business Industry the days of low pay and cheap labour must end, and that it was time to invest in training those already in the UK. He also promised to be pragmatic about the shortage of workers, saying if he gets into government, he's willing to accept increased skilled immigration.
But our common goal must be to help the British economy off its immigration dependency, to start investing more in training workers who are already here. The days when low pay and cheap labour are part of the British way on growth must end. This isn't about Brexit. All around the world, business is waking up to the fact we live in a new era for labour. And while they're adapting, our low-growth model is holding us back.
Energy suppliers have been named and shamed for failing vulnerable customers, with the regulator Ofgem saying problems across the board needed to urgently be addressed. A review found severe weaknesses at 5 companies: Good Energy, Outfox, So Energy, True Energy and Utilia. Ofgem says households are missing out on free gas safety checks, and firms aren't doing enough to identify those on prepayment meters who may need help. In total, 17 suppliers have been told they need to improve their approach to vulnerable customers. Expats are protesting against a real-term reduction in their UK state pensions. Nearly 500,000 OAPs live in countries that don't have an uprating agreement with the UK, which means their state pension is frozen at the level when they started receiving the payment. The demonstrators say many of them are getting less than half the full state pension of £141 a week. The Deputy Prime Minister is going to be questioned over alleged bullying. Dominic Raab, who's facing an investigation into 2 formal complaints against him, will face the Justice Committee this afternoon. He's already said he's confident he behaved professionally and will be cleared of any wrongdoing. At Downing Street this morning, he reiterated his position.
Deputy Prime Minister, are you confident you're going to clear your name?
Absolutely.
For the first time, MPs can expense the cost of food and non-alcoholic drinks for Christmas staff parties to the taxpayer. Alcohol isn't included, but it does include decorations for the office, according to the Daily Mail. MPs have been told their claims should represent value for money in this financial climate. The number of people killed during the Indonesian earthquake has risen to 252. Western Java's local government says 377 people were injured when the 5.6 magnitude quake hit yesterday. More than 7,000 people have been displaced. 25 aftershocks have rocked the region, hampering rescue efforts. 31 people are still missing. The RAC says supermarkets are taking advantage of drivers by charging higher prices than they should be. It said fuel retailers are refusing to lower their prices at the pump despite a drop in wholesale costs. Supermarket profit margins are reportedly around 15 pence a litre for petrol and diesel. The King is hosting his first state visit as sovereign. King Charles will welcome the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa during a ceremony at Horse Guards Parade. The event will also be attended by the Queen Consort and the Prince and Princess of Wales. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now back to Mark.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed for that. And without further ado, let's take you live straight back to Horse Guards Parade, where we have this first state visit for some 3 years, with the King and Queen Consort welcoming South Africa's president ahead of this two-day visit. Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker is looking at these pictures as well. Cameron, I was just looking in the notes. This is the first state visit for 3 years because, of course, there was stop for the COVID pandemic.
It certainly is, Mark. Yes, it was President Trump back in 2019 who was hosted by the late Queen Elizabeth II here in the United Kingdom. Of course, there was a pandemic, and as I understand it, this particular state visit of South Africa was actually in the early stages of planning during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II before she passed away. But now, of course, it is King Charles III hosting his first state visit of the United Kingdom for South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, it's the royal family's power of soft diplomacy in action here. It's what makes Britain great, perhaps some would argue. We have politicians here, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary are all here to greet South Africa's President. We understand he's expected to arrive imminently. The Prince and Princess of Wales have gone to greet him on behalf of the King, and then they will escort him here to Horse Guards Parade, where there will be a big ceremonial welcome involving 1,000 soldiers and over 200 horses, Mark.
See everything out on full show, and I think then plans for His Majesty and the Queen Consort to ride down the Mall with the President in a carriage procession to Buckingham Palace, a lunch, then a full state banquet tonight. I mean, they're not holding back, are they?
No, they're certainly not. And I think, Mark, after 3 years since the pandemic, it's certainly long overdue. Now, usually the president's going to be treated to a stay at Buckingham Palace, but due to that resurfacing work, I understand that's not actually the plan this time. He is staying in a separate hotel somewhere else. But that state banquet, those staterooms which have greeted and have impressed so many foreign leaders over the years. Of course, Her Majesty the Queen actually hosted over 100 state visits during the course of her reign, and of course this is King Charles III's first one, so a big state banquet. So we're expecting around 150 guests to that later on this evening. The King is expected to make a speech, as well as the South African President, and it's the Foreign Office actually that has invited the South African President here. It's not to do with the King, but of course it's the royal family's chance to put on a display of pomp and pageantry to really deepen the ties between South Africa and the United Kingdom, and it's something King Charles will be particularly interested in because he very much wants to, as we understand it, shore up support for the Commonwealth, which South Africa is part of.
Yes.
The South African President, I believe, is just arriving here at Horse Guards Parade with the Prince and Princess of Wales. As soon as he steps out of the car, yeah, that is the South African President, we're expecting a gun salute in Green Park. 41 guns will fire. The King Street Royal Horse Artillery will fire them. at Green Park, as well as another 41-gun salute at the Tower of London. But let's just watch these pictures here of the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa arriving at Horse Guards Parade.
Yes, and this, the Guard of Honour with the number 7 company Coldstream Guards. Unfortunately, some of the security detail parking right in front of our cameras, which is not very kind of them. However, obviously, there is a large retinue as well, Cameron, in terms of the party coming with the President, who I guess will be part of the lunch as well in Buckingham Palace.
Yes, there is a private lunch at Buckingham Palace, followed by a tour of the gallery in Buckingham Palace, that long gallery, and a number of South African artefacts, as I understand it, have been brought from the royal collection to be put on display there, and then the King will take the President into the long gallery to view them. The President's then expected to leave Buckingham Palace. We just heard the gun salutes there, fire in Green Park. He's expected to leave Buckingham Palace to go to Westminster Abbey to view a memorial stone for the former South African President Nelson Mandela, before he then goes to the Houses of Parliament to address both houses, so House of Lords and House of Commons. This is the South African national anthem playing. And then following that, the South African President will make his way back to Buckingham Palace for the state banquet. And it will be the first time, we believe, we will see the Queen Consort and Princess of Wales wear tiaras for the first time since taking up their new role. So if you're into royal fashion, it's something to look forward to, Mark.
Soft power and, of course, the importance of the Commonwealth as a political entity as much as anything else. But it's interesting, too, that the Prime Minister has announced this plan to turbocharge economic growth with South Africa. This joint project, an infrastructure partnership of £5.37 billion being signed with South Africa, effectively a business deal for the next 3 years.
Yes, exactly, Mark. Rishi Sunak released a statement yesterday where he said we have ambitious plans to turbocharge infrastructure, as you said, Mark, and investment in economic growth together. South Africa is the largest trading partner of the United Kingdom within the continent of Africa, and I think this state visit is very much an opportunity for the British government to strengthen those ties, strengthen those trade relationships with that nation. We understand the President is expected to have a number of political meetings tomorrow, but today is very much about British pomp, British ceremony, and being very much being hosted by His Majesty the King, the hospitality of Buckingham Palace, as it does so well and has done for hundreds of years.
And that was the anthem, as you said, with the Coldstream Guards, number 7 company, presenting arms. And as you were saying, the guns being fired across, I think it's Green Park, as usual, Cameron, with the gun salute.
Yeah, it's a 41-gun salute inside Green Park by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, under the command of Major Francesca Sykes. There's also a separate gun salute at His Majesty's Fortress, which is, of course, the Tower of London, by the Honourable Artillery Company, under the command of Major Matthew Aldridge. And the Guard of Honour is going to be giving a royal salute, and as we've seen, the South African national anthem has been played. And then following this procession, this formal, well, we can see actually the King and the President go to expect the Guard of Honour, number 7 Coldstream Guards. Of course, the King is the Colonel-in-Chief of that army regiment.
So they're going to inspect the Guard now, and we can see the interest behind then, Cameron, with a number of cameras and all with the long lenses. Clearly, this is an important occasion for South Africa as well, back on the world stage with all of its political difficulties in recent years.
Indeed, Mark, yes. There's been a number of foreign media here at Horse Guards Parade. I'm stood in the media pen for British media, but there is a separate one, of course, for foreign media too. It's very much a strengthening of ties here in the United Kingdom. But of course, there are controversies in South Africa at the moment, particularly, and also here with Great Britain. Of course, we've got this huge, spectacular state banquet and a carriage procession from Horse Guards to Buckingham Palace following this formal welcome. But then at the same time, Mark, we've got to remember there is a cost of living crisis at the moment. Lots of people are struggling to heat their homes, to feed their children. So perhaps critics would say that this is a bit out of touch with reality. However, it is very much a chance to strengthen trade relationships with foreign nations, particularly after Brexit. And as I said, it's one of the largest trading partners. It's the largest trading partner, South Africa is, for the United Kingdom within the continent of Africa.
And in terms of the length of the visit, some 2 days, we believe that also the President will be addressing both chambers of the House, the Commons and the Lords, and clearly the political aspect will be foremost then.
Yes, it certainly will, Mark. Yeah, the President is expected following a private lunch with the King inside Buckingham Palace. He is expected to address both houses of Parliament within the Palace of Westminster. That's following a short visit to Westminster Abbey as well. You'll be able to see, just coming into view now, the carriage that will be taking the King and the President back in this procession to Buckingham Palace. It's a carriage that has been used on many occasions, dating way back to Queen Victoria, actually, Mark, because the British tradition is what perhaps is a selling point to those abroad. It is those old-fashioned, as some would put it, traditions that really sell to United Kingdom as a partner that they want to trade with. And of course, the hospitality that's put on by the royal family to foreign heads of state, prime ministers, foreign presidents, and of course, foreign royal families is something that many always remember and always talk about for years to come.
Yes, so we're just being told that we've got senior members of the Cabinet there for this ceremony welcome as well, the Lord Mayor of London, Nicholas Lyons, Defence Chiefs of Staff, and as you were saying, the South African party staying at a luxury hotel nearby, not at Buckingham Palace, but clearly they are really putting on a show here for this first Commonwealth visit and the first state visit such of the new reign.
Indeed, Mark, yes. The Queen hosted over 100 state visits within her reign. It was something which she became very much accustomed to. The last one was President Trump in 2019. It is the King's first state visit, but of course he would have been involved as Prince of Wales in hosting foreign heads of state in the United Kingdom. But it's his chance perhaps to really put his stamp on how state visits are now done under the reign of King Charles III. I've been told this morning, actually, that he was very keen, although, of course, the state visit originally was planned for Queen Elizabeth II to host. He was very keen to continue with the plans, even though it's so soon after the death of the Queen and the sad royal mourning period that happened in September.
Well, we can tell you that
it's that continuation of the monarchy.
Yeah, indeed. We're being told that it'll be the Sovereign's escort, the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment, Lifeguards and Blues and Royals, commanded by Major Robert Pereira, the Blues and Royals, and Lieutenant Colonel James Shaw, who's Brigade Major of Headquarters Household Division, underlining the fact this is the first time since 2018 they've had a processional state visit on Horse Guards with almost everyone on parade, he said. So clearly there will have been a bit of rehearsal and preparation for this to get it absolutely right.
Yeah, there certainly was, Mark. Weeks of preparation have gone into this visit, involving 7 military bands, 9 military units. Of course, we can see the carriages just starting to head off now from Horse Guards Parade, and they'll be heading down the Mall. There's flags of all the Commonwealth countries lining the route, but up the Mall, it's very much the Union flags and South African flags for this state visit of the South African president. I think this is just British pomp and pageantry in action here, that power of soft diplomacy which the royal family has, and the crowds have gathered on the Mall. There's been a very tight security presence here, Mark, as you can imagine, but I can actually see crowds here at the crash barriers starting to run across St James's Park to try and get a view of members of the royal family and the South African president Cyril Ramaphosa at the Mall so they can watch them wave.
Yeah, and we've switched, as you were speaking, Cameron, to our shot of the Mall with the flags again, including the South African flag, all the way down the Rainbow Nation, of course. And as you were saying, huge crowds again. I mean, this is quite interesting that clearly after the events of the royal funeral, people have identified with the King and this new reign.
They certainly have. They're just leaving Horse Guards, as I said. They're going to be escorted back to Buckingham Palace by the Sovereign's escort, provided by the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiments. Along the route, the Mall is lined with troops of the Nijmegen Company Grenadier Guards, F Company Scots Guards, and the 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards. The music is being played by bands of the Grenadier Guards, Mark. All these British military regiments taking part in this state's visit. It really is the British royal family putting on a show for their foreign guests, and therefore when all these political meetings start happening tomorrow between the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the South African President, he's going to be perhaps warmed up for those tough trade talks which inevitably are going to be taking place tomorrow.
And we've got the national anthem playing as you say, the Guard of Honour comes down the Mall towards our camera. So the carriage and procession and Guard of Honour now heading back towards Buckingham Palace. As Cameron was saying, there is this lunch being hosted and then the state banquet tonight. And Cameron, one reflects perhaps that all these occasions are useful preparation or even rehearsal for the coronation and what will be unveiled for next spring.
Indeed, Mark, weeks of planning has gone into this particular state's visit. It's something which Great Britain is very much prepared for, and the armed forces are prepared for, as well as the royal household. It's a well-oiled machine, I think. We have seen, haven't we, Mark, in this last year, a number of state occasions. Of course, first we had the Platinum Jubilee of the late Queen Elizabeth II back in June 2022, and then we had the sad death of her late Majesty. Again, a big state occasion which was carefully planned. And now we have something more positive, Mark, the state visit of a foreign leader, the South African president, which was in the early stages of planning, like I said, before the Queen passed away, but it's something the King was very much keen to plough on with, as it were. And now, of course, we have the coronation coming up in May. So perhaps this is a small-scale rehearsal for the pomp and pageantry that we'll see then.
And one reflects maybe that the late Queen would be quite happy to see so many horses involved in this ceremony as the gun carriages move across from Green Park back to their barracks, and the mounted officers of the Metropolitan Police at the front there as ever with their horse riding skills on display, controlling and getting them in position. It's all very, very well rehearsed and then executed, of course, on the day, even though one or two of the horses do get a bit frisky with all the noise.
Indeed, Mark, I think it's something which the horses are very used to by now. 230 horses have been taking part in this procession and ceremonial welcome today. As I understand it, this is their last big state occasion until they have a winter break. They go to graze in fields outside of London to give them a bit of a break from all of the state occasions that they've had to take part in. Of course, it was Remembrance Sunday service as well just a couple of weeks ago. The Platinum Jubilee, the sad death of Her Majesty the Queen as well, and this state visit, so they can have a break over Christmas, come back to London, get all shined up again, ready for the coronation, Mark, as we've been mentioning.
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of horses to put out on to pasture, isn't there? And one hopes that they've got enough grass for all of them.
Fingers crossed, Mark. Yes, I think it can perhaps get a bit stuffy in the Royal Mews just to the south side of Buckingham Palace. But yes, as I understand it, they're being taken out of London to have a break and be grazing in some fields, as many horses do.
And boy, have they earned it.
The Prime
as you
Minister,
say, they've been
Foreign
hard at work.
Secretary. Yes, if you come back to our camera, Mark, the Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary are walking together, smiling back towards Downing Street from Horse Guards Parade.
Yes, we've got Prime Minister and also, as you say, Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, all walking across Horse Guards. And one assumes, Cameron, they will be joining that lunch as well at some stage?
They will not be joining the private lunch, Mark, but I would be very surprised if they weren't on the guest list for the state banquet tonight. 150 people expected at the state banquet tonight, but it's a very small, intimate, private lunch with the King and perhaps Prince and Princess of Wales and Queen Consorts too.
Yeah, and we can see the carriage going past there with the Prince and Princess of Wales and waving at the crowds with the President's wife, who I think they collected from the hotel a little earlier with the Royal Rolls-Royce, and another vintage Rolls-Royce following there. I think that's a Phantom 1 or a Phantom 2, dating from the 1940s, with the dignitaries on board, and clearly, as Cameron was saying, pomp and circumstance on show here. And then the security detail as ever, and glad to say no incidents given obviously what is sometimes seen as a controversial visit given the political circumstances, of course, of all these countries coming to visit Britain, but no protests that we're aware of. And other members of the South African Party heading across Horse Guards Parade on foot. And any idea about the numbers tonight then, Cameron, for this official banquet?
So we're expecting around each state banquet hosts around 150 guests inside the ballroom of Buckingham Palace. It's one of the staterooms. It's the largest stateroom, as a matter of fact, and there will be very much the equivalent of the royal family bringing out the best china to put on the best display of British hospitality here. The King is expected to deliver a speech before the meal, and then the South African president will also make a speech, and there will be a toast to South Africa and the president, of course, the main guest here at Buckingham Palace. We're expecting the Prime Minister to be among the guest lists, but also it will be a number of South African citizens who live within the United Kingdom who make perhaps a contribution to the economy, to art, to culture here in Great Britain. So those are the sorts of people we can expect to be invited to this state banquet tonight. And, of course, members of the royal family, the Prince and Princess of Wales, of course, but the Earl and Countess of Wessex are expected to be there too.
And you were just mentioning as well there'll be a visit to Westminster Abbey. I think the Field of Remembrance is still there, and of course we saw the poppy wreaths as they walked across Horse Guards there, and bearing in mind that, of course, many South African troops and others from the Commonwealth served in both World Wars.
Yes, they did, Mark. They are also part of the Commonwealth, and if you remember, back in 1947, it was the then Princess Elizabeth who delivered that very famous speech where she declared that her whole life would be devoted to service. And then, of course, South Africa left the Commonwealth during her reign, but then rejoined during the reign, I believe, of Nelson Mandela in the 1990s, and is very much part of this strong family of nations which the Commonwealth takes pride in. All these flags, of course, are we can see a long Horse Guards parade of the Commonwealth, and that is one of King Charles III's main aims, I think, in the early stages of his reign, very much shoring up support for the Commonwealth of Nations, which he is now head of. He took over from the late Queen Elizabeth II, Mark. So lots going on. Yes, as you said, the President of South Africa will be going to Westminster Abbey. There's also a memorial stone to Nelson Mandela, the former South African president there, which he is expected to pay tributes to.
Cameron, thank you very much indeed. With another milestone, the King's reign seeing its first state visit, in fact, the first state visit to London for some 3 years, with the King and Queen Consort welcoming Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of South Africa, and now heading to that private lunch. And then, as Cameron was saying, the tradition of laying the wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior in Westminster Abbey, as well as the stone to Nelson Mandela, and then addressing MPs and peers in the Royal Gallery of the Palace of Westminster. Well, let's update you now on the other news of the day, with the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer telling the CBI conference in Birmingham that he wanted a new partnership with the business community. On the basis of economic migration, he said that Labour wanted a pragmatic approach while seeking to ensure that British workers had the skills needed to fill vacancies. Well, this is what he told the business leaders. Haven't got that clip, but certainly he was telling those members of the delegates of the CBI annual conference that Labour would actually have a new relationship, as he said. I think we can hear what he had to say now.
Us to do the hard yards on growth. But we'll also need to be pragmatic on the basic lack of people. We won't ignore the need for workers to come to this country. We can't have a situation, as we did with HGV drivers, where temporary shortages threaten to cripple entire sectors of our economy.
Some reaction with our political correspondent Tom Harwood joining us now in Downing Street. And Tom, it's interesting that parts of that speech remarkably similar in sentiment to what Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was telling the CBI only yesterday.
Yes, on so many areas, the Tory party and the Labour Party are now singing from very similar, if not the same, hymn sheets. Now, there's a lot of analysis to be done as to whether that's because the Tory party has lurched to the left or because the Labour Party has lurched to the centre ground. Perhaps it's been a bit of both, but certainly on the rhetoric around migration, around the relationship with the European Union as well, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are sounding on the face of it very similar. Of course, one of the big asks from the Confederation of British Industry over the last 2 days of their conference has been a liberalisation of migration rules, perhaps an expansion of those shortage worker lists to allow more people in. They say, rightly, that there are over 1 million job vacancies in the United Kingdom. But in answer to their calls, both Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer have been saying the priority must be to train up British workers, many of whom, of course, are out of work, despite there being so many job vacancies. Sir Keir Starmer today saying the priority must be on jobs and training British workers, suggesting perhaps that the issue is that there hasn't been the right skills training for British people so far. Some people disagree with that. However, the Institute of Economic Affairs, for example, this morning has been saying that it's less to do with the skills training and more to do with the incentive structure here in the United Kingdom, that it's too easy to roll back onto benefits, and that perhaps if there was a stronger incentive structure, people would be more likely to go into work. It wasn't, after all, a lack of skills that meant that people wanted to go on, or quite enjoyed going on furlough, for example, the last 2 years, which of course has led to a number of people leaving the workforce. But yes, the Labour Party focusing on a more populist message, on a headline message that speaks to some of those seats they lost in what's become to be known as the Red Wall, saying that they will prioritise British workers above foreign workers. However, reading into the detail there, perhaps the headlines are not entirely accurate, because the detail of Sir Keir Starmer's speech also mentioned that if there were to be migration liberalisations under Labour, they would be coming in parallel with workforce regulations, with strengthening employment rights. Now, that might sound like a bit of a throwaway line, but it may well be a very key one, because that line in and of itself shows that the Labour Party are exploring ways in which there may be visa liberalisations, migration liberalisations, alongside a system of employment protection as well, a sort of quid pro quo. That may well have been the subtext of Sir Keir Starmer's speech today, even if it didn't quite make the headlines.
Yeah, and we guess there'd be some kind of point system maybe attached to the skills for the workforce coming in. But, I mean, looking at the bigger picture with the OECD obviously indicating that we may actually be bottom of the league for any growth in the coming years, Keir Starmer also acknowledging that Labour policies may have to be shelved as a result of economic conditions when or if they get to number 10.
Yes, this is a line that Sir Keir Starmer has used a number of times, first tried out around the Labour Party conference in September, which is that he may well not be able to do, in his words, good Labour things that he would want to do when in power because of the constraints of the economy, of the scale of borrowing or of anything else, saying that he would be much more cautious in terms of rolling out any planned reform agendas than perhaps many of his own supporters would like him to be. In that funny sort of way, he's speaking a lot in a very similar way to Rishi Sunak, of course, who spent the whole summer saying that he wouldn't be able to deliver tax cuts and wouldn't be able to do things that the Conservative base would like. In the same way, Sir Keir Starmer saying he wouldn't be able to do things that the Labour Party would like. And in the end, these two leaders ending up in much the same position.
Yeah, it seems sort of getting them a bit confused, aren't we, at the moment? I wonder why. Anyway, on that note, Tom, thank you very much indeed for that at Downing Street. Let me just actually update you with something we're getting from inside Downing Street behind there, Tom. This is on the whole topic of MPs being able to claim on expenses the cost of a Christmas party, taxpayers' money, of course. Apparently, Rishi Sunak has now warned MPs they will have to justify their expenses to voters after being told for the first time they could charge for Christmas parties. The Prime Minister is saying it certainly doesn't intend to put food, refreshments or decorations on expenses after the guidance was issued. Alcohol, of course, deemed off limits. But the Prime Minister's official spokesman saying questions on these sorts of arrangements should be for IPSA, the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority. So clearly handing the ball back to them for the rather difficult question. Well, indeed, in the run-up to Christmas, many of us worried about the rising costs of living with the price of Christmas food and gifts for our loved ones, if we haven't got expenses accounts. But at a Belfast Christmas market, traders hoping that people can still get into that spirit of the season, as Doogie Beattie now reports.
Sights and smells that signal Christmas is on its way. But even the councils are counting their pennies and hoping that the retailers are going to recover from the lockdown restrictions that kept revenue down. Over the next couple of weekends, Christmas tree lights will be lit across the UK. Here in Belfast, it was a very low-key ceremony in order to keep costs down. The 18th annual Christmas market is now well underway. It brings millions into the local economy, as it's one of only two on the island of Ireland. Traders here are hoping that the cost of living doesn't bite just so tight.
Oh, we love Belfast. It's amazing. It's the first time we've been here. We've never been to Belfast before. We've never traded here. The people are super friendly and the city is super clean.
Cheryl Rudman is a South African who is hoping that her culinary delights may catch on in the Belfast market.
Of course, the cost of living is getting so expensive. People sometimes feel that they might splash out a little bit more on smaller things, and just give themselves a bit of joy by walking around, having something different to eat, eating out, every third night or fourth night and popping down to the market, to see what it's about. We have something here called bunny chow, which is literally a loaf of bread, half a loaf, which scoop out the middle, the inside, and then we stuff it full of curry. That's in South Africa. There's a province, Durban, and that's mainly a Durban dish type of style.
Abdul Shafarnes has traded here for many years and says that they are keeping prices down and people are still buying.
Honestly, it's not affecting people. We're trying ourselves as well to not to put the prices up, even though this is handcrafted, but we're taking into consideration what's going on. We have to help each other.
The market is an attraction that brings footfall into Belfast, and the city will be anxious to keep shoppers there. But the rising energy costs have seen downscaling of lights throughout the area, and retailers are hopeful that the Christmas feeling doesn't dim. Dougie Beattie, GB News, Belfast.
With the stars shining bright. Now, the Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, may face a grilling about his behaviour as he goes in front of a committee of MPs a little later this afternoon, amid fresh reports that a top Whitehall official has had to apologise for his behaviour at a meeting. Mr Raab already being investigated after 2 formal complaints about his alleged bullying of staff made last week, but he strongly denied those allegations, saying he's confident that he behaved professionally. Our political reporter Catherine Foster joining us in the studio. Catherine, he's not been called to the committee as a alleged naughty boy as such. He's actually there to talk about problems in the justice system and court delays and so on.
Yeah, so this is the Justice Select Committee. Obviously, right. He's the Secretary for Justice. So it'll be court backlogs, all the problems within the criminal justice system, of which, of course, we know there are many. But it does seem pretty inconceivable, doesn't it, that they'll be able to resist the temptation to ask something about his behaviour, because after a lull of a couple of days when everybody was obsessing about was Brexit going to be betrayed, he is back in the news again with fresh allegations today about
right.
bad
And there is an inquiry underway, an independent inquiry into formal allegations, although we've now basically got another suggestion that a Whitehall official has had to apologise for his behaviour. So where are we with all the sort of alleged incidents?
Yes and no on the inquiry.
Right.
2 formal complaints were made last Wednesday.
Yeah.
Dominic Raab decided to get ahead of himself.
Exactly, yeah.
Request an investigation.
Yeah.
The investigation will happen, but it hasn't started.
Ah, right,
yet.
OK.
It hasn't started.
So even though he's asked for it, it's not in train as such?
It's not in train, because they haven't appointed somebody yet to take care of the investigation. So the Prime Minister's spokesman was asked in the lobby briefing this morning about that appointment. The process is ongoing. Ditto the ethics advisor. The government has been many months without an ethics advisor. Asked about that process. Ongoing.
Right.
So the investigation has yet to begin.
OK, and the allegations ongoing. So, I mean, what's this latest suggestion from this top Whitehall official, as he's been called?
So the latest one is that when Dominic Raab was Justice Minister earlier this year, he was so... His behaviour was so unprofessional, so rude to Home Office officials that after the meeting, the chief civil servant in the Justice Department, Antonio Romeo, personally apologised to the people from the Home Office for the Justice Secretary's behaviour. It said that she did that because she was wary that they might lodge a formal complaint. So yet another allegation of him being, I think, to put it mildly, a tough boss. I don't think anybody disputes that he's a tough boss. He has very high standards. He is demanding.
And it seems to be that most of the alleged behaviour are in these meetings where he's using quite robust language. And you know, some commentators, observers have said, well, what may not be acceptable in a proper work environment, it's a different circumstance in the political field where clearly, you know, you are talking about quite, how shall I say, emotive subjects. That, you know, you want delivery on these things.
Certainly Westminster is, first of all, not a normal work by any stretch of the imagination, is it? Also, it's very, very pressured. That said, although people are under a lot of strain, clearly when people are at a point that they feel there's a culture of fear, when they're scared to go into meetings, when people are leaving through stress, there is an issue. But of course, where does something tip through having had high standards and being demanding and a bit difficult into bullying? That's a grey area.
Or you become a distraction, as we remember Gavin Williamson using that phrase. Are you talking about the person and what's going on rather than the job he's supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
That becomes a political difficulty.
Yeah, and Rishi Sunak obviously does not want to lose another cabinet minister, so there'll be no outcome of the investigation soon, partly because it hasn't yet started.
Anyway, we shall dip in to that meeting at 2:30 and see what robust language is used at that time. Catherine, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, a major upset in the World Cup because Saudi Arabia have stunned one of the pre-tournament favourites, Argentina, with a 2-1 victory. Follows that barnstorming occasion, England yesterday, the Three Lions managing that 6-2 win over Iran, and Wales, well, managing to snatch a draw, shall we say, against the USA, courtesy of this Gareth Bale penalty. And later today, just to update you, France facing Australia at 7. But let's head live to Qatar and join our GB News reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's been following the tournament. Blimey, Argentina will be scratching their heads and perhaps even Mr Messi as well.
Argentina, 2 times world champions, you know, ranked 3rd in the world, losing to Saudi Arabia, who are ranked lower than Qatar. It's one of the greatest ever World Cup shocks. The weird thing about the World Cup here in Doha for us is that there actually aren't that many restaurants and cafes, certainly here in the Souk Waqif, that are showing the football. But this cafe over here is where we were sitting. The guy decided to put it on the TV in there. And as the game wore on, it got busier and busier and busier and more packed. And we started filming, and we filmed the final whistle as it went in that game. Look at the crowd and listen to the atmosphere when that final whistle went. Arabia, the only country with a land border with Qatar, so they're kind of like next door neighbours. But this is going to be a victory celebrated not just by those in Saudi Arabia, but the whole of the Arab world. We can speak now to some Saudi Arabia fans. How are you feeling, guys?
It's incredible today. It's amazing. That's Argentina, man.
Yeah,
that's the Messi playing with them.
How did they do it? How did they beat Argentina?
By power.
But I mean, how? Argentina are very good at football. How did Saudi Arabia win?
Argentina, it is very good, like because Saudi Arabia, it is the best.
Yeah.
Argentina, it is no match اليوم.
Yeah.
No match.
Well, how?
I think they not in the moment, maybe.
Not in the moment. Yeah, but Saudi Arabia played well, and their winning goal was good.
They're doing good.
Yeah.
Yeah, the team Saudi Arabia, they're doing good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is very good.
Yeah. How will people in Saudi Arabia feel?
It is amazing. It is very, very happy.
Show you my phone. That's
well, yeah, I bet. Yeah,
it's incredible.
It is very, very happy.
Well, it's very happy. All of the people, of the public.
Yeah, and so surprising.
Yeah. Yes, very surprising.
Yeah, great. Thank you for speaking to us, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Listen, they're happy. They're going to continue celebrating here in the streets of Qatar. It gets very busy here in the Souk Waqif in the evening. The Saudi Arabia fans were in full voice last night. They're going to be absolutely crazy later on. There are other matches taking place as well. Denmark are playing Tunisia, Mexico taking on Poland, and France against Australia. Hey, listen, Australia aren't the favourites in that one. France are. But given what's just happened with the Saudi Arabia-Argentina match, Australia will take a lot of heart from that.
Yeah, who knows what's going to happen, of course. Just off the pitch, a bit more controversy emerging on what they're doing in terms of the security there. I gather the Football Association of Wales is now raising questions where some of their supporters with these hats, obviously with the rainbow colours on them, have been asked to take those hats off. I mean, clearly there's still a bit of unease out there.
Yeah, there is still a little bit unease. Look, they knew what it was like. It was going to be like if they tried wearing those, those colours that are supporting the LGBT community. As some Saudi fans come past us, we'll just let them pass, just so we can talk a little bit more about that hat issue. Yeah, she was wearing a hat. She tried to get into the game. Listen, it was taken away from her, and yeah, the Welsh FA are going to raise it. But some fans that I've spoken to said, look, it's a little bit silly to try and wear that kind of hat and enter the stadium knowing full well the attitude towards the LGBT community here in Qatar. So, yeah, speaking to some fans, there's a little bit of sympathy, but also some people saying, well, look, you shouldn't have worn that hat in the first place.
Yeah. Paul, in what seems to be now Qatar's Wembley way, thanks very much indeed for updating us. Back to you, of course, as we get more. Thank you very much indeed. Great stuff. The Saudi fans enjoying their moment there. Now, let's reflect that nearly 500,000 UK pensioners living overseas are to be excluded from the annual state pension increase because they live in a country without any uprating agreement with the UK. Now, it means the state pension frozen at a level when they left the UK. So today, a delegation of UK state pensioners from across the world flying to London to hand in letters to protest at the Department for Work and Pensions. Our reporter Ellie Costello has been speaking to some of them in Westminster. And Ellie, they really are out of pocket, despite obviously all the publicity about this triple lock coming in next year. They won't even get that.
Yes, exactly, Mark. That's something they are not entitled to, and that is why this small delegation has flown in from all over the world today, representing those 500,000 pensioners who are not entitled to an uprated pension. So it means that in the month that they first started taking out their pension, that pension is then frozen in time. It never goes up with inflation. So in some of the worst cases around the world, there are veterans, British veterans who served in the Second World War who have now moved to Commonwealth countries such as Australia or Canada, and they are living on as little as £25 a week. And it's quite surprising actually how many people aren't aware of this. 500,000 people excluded from this, mainly those from the Windrush generation who came to work in this country after the Second World War and then returned back home to the Caribbean, but also veterans and expats as well. Well, earlier I spoke to Ian Andexer, who is chairman of the Canadian Alliance of British Pensioners. He's flown here especially today from Canada, and he told me who he's here to represent.
From Canada, and I'm the chairman of a British pensioners group in Canada, representing 127,000 Brits who have chosen Canada as their home and who suffer the discrimination inflicted upon them by the British government with their UK state pension. As an example, there's a 96-year-old man who worked all his life in the UK, and at age 65 he retired to Vancouver to be closer to his daughter. And in 31 years ago when he retired, the British pension I think was about £46 a week. For 31 years, that's what he's earned, £46 a week. The irony of this is that he only lives 600 yards away from the USA border, and if he was that 600 yards further south, he would actually get a fully indexed pension. We've calculated that over 31 years, he's lost about $120,000, Canadian dollars. We're not asking for anything we don't justifiably deserve. If we've paid into a system, we should be treated equally as everybody else. And to have the indignation of being told that your pension's never going to go up, the idea of an increase in pension every year is to keep up with inflation. And after 31 years, you can imagine the lack of buying power that he's got with £46 a week. And there are many people like him.
That's Ian Andexer there. That's the chairman of the Canadian Alliance of British Pensioners. Now, the Department of Work and Pensions says that this is a long-standing policy, and they say that pensions will go up to the current rate if these pensioners return to live in the UK. But speaking to the small delegation that are coming to Westminster today, they said the biggest thing for them is awareness. They haven't come to London since 2018, and they are shocked at how few people understand that this is working forward-looking policy, and they know that a number of new MPs have come into Parliament since 2018, and that's why they flew in from all over the world to give this letter into the Department of Work and Pensions today.
Ellie, thank you for updating us on that. Well, in fact, I think we can speak now to Sir Peter Bottomley, Conservative MP for Worthing West. Sir Peter, thanks for joining us. I believe that you are maybe one of the MPs and Lords, some 60 of you, who've written to the government to actually tackle what's called a gross injustice. I think that's the phrase you've used.
Well, it's more than a gross injustice. It's a complete scandal. In the 1950s, when people started thinking about these things, there wasn't much inflation, so the provisions weren't made with our old dominions, Canada, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and now half the countries around the world. So 500,000 pensioners do get increases, half don't, and there's no rhyme, reason, logic or justification. It's a scandal, it's an injustice, it needs to be changed.
Yeah, because all these people would have paid their national insurance over their working lives.
That's right, but as the Canadian spokesman said, what's the reason why one side of the parallel you get it and the other side you don't? Why in some islands in the Caribbean you get it and others you don't? Why all the countries of the European Union get it and other countries don't? It's just wrong, it's unfair. Government needs to face up to it. It's completely scandalous. I'm very sorry that the courts haven't ruled the government action illegal.
Yeah, I think there are some 48 Commonwealth countries where this is not included, and some of these pensioners are on as little as £65 a week, when we've got this suggestion that the triple lock could bump it up to £200 next April. What's gone wrong? I mean, is it paperwork and bureaucracy?
No, it's meanness in the Treasury, not solving it earlier. If it had been solved in the 1950s or 1960s or even the 1970s when I started on it, nearly 40 years ago, look at the cost. Now they think the costs are too great, and so they're putting it off so the costs get greater. What we need to do is draw a line and say at least that from now on people get inflation increases as experienced in Britain together with other pensioners. Otherwise, we perhaps ought to say to everybody, come back and live in Britain. 500,000 more people will come to this country. They'll get their pensions uprated and then see how the Treasury like that. They'll have to pay their health costs, pay their housing costs. Let's teach them.
But it is one of the problems that if the government does acknowledge, they will have to backdate the uplift, and that could be a huge bill.
Well, if they had to, but Sir Roger Gale, who's one of the leaders in Parliament on this, has said, let's say to the Treasury and the government, we won't expect you to, we'd like you to update and backdate, but if you won't, at least start updating now in line with inflation. Do something that makes a difference. Just don't, to go on doing nothing is an insult to everybody up age in half the countries around the world.
Sir Peter Bottomley, thank you very much indeed. And of course, we'll speak to you again and see what reaction there has been and if there's been any development. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's move to another issue with almost a fifth of NHS trusts being rated red for infant mortality rates. That's according to a national audit. A total of 23 trusts receiving that red rating from Mothers and Babies Reducing Risk through Audit and Confidential Inquiries, or Embrace as it's called. Well, it means that the death rate for 2020 more than 5% above the average for other countries. Well, Embrace has looked at stillbirths and deaths within 4 weeks of birth, and in other research, also finding a number of women who died up to 6 weeks after having a baby, up by a quarter over the past 5 years. Indeed, 229 mums dying alongside 27 of their babies between 2018 and 2020. Many of those deaths deemed avoidable. Well, we're joined now by Sandra Igwe, who's CEO of the Motherhood Group. Sandra, thanks very much for joining us. What's the suggestion as what's going wrong here? Because I know a lot of maternity services say they're very short of staff.
It's really sad what's going on at the moment in the NHS, and the saddest part about it is that most of these deaths are actually preventable and are associated with the inequalities that persist in the UK. Quite frankly, many mothers report that they're not being listened to, their concerns are not being raised appropriately, and that they're not really having their immediate needs met by healthcare professionals. Again, Black mothers are currently 3.7 times more likely to die and have complications. Asians are 1.8. And within the UK, most of the mothers that are coming into maternal mortality issues are from deprived areas. And so we need an urgent action of services listening to women and taking every single concern that they have as, an urgent matter.
It could be social conditions as well as the treatment at the individual hospital then?
Absolutely. I think there's a combination of both social and also the conditions. Definitely staff members are underfunded, overworked, but also we're not really attending to every single mother's individual needs at that moment. 1 in 9 women who died were at severe and multiple disadvantage associated with mental health, substance abuse, and also domestic abuse. Why are we not looking at all of the compounding factors that impact a mother's outcome? Why are we not causing services to understand how important it is to look at a mother's mental health before she's pregnant, during her pregnancy, and after giving birth? Why are we allowing all of these mothers, especially Black and ethnic minority mothers, to slip through the net, causing very preventable deaths and harm towards mothers and their babies?
Yeah, and their babies too, indeed. Sandra, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. Well, let's just tell you in a statement, NHS England has said the Embrace data demonstrates the significant progress that's been made to reduce stillbirths and neonatal deaths since 2010, but we know further action is needed to ensure continued safe care for all women, babies and their families. NHS England continues to support trusts and integrated care boards to make improvements to the maternity and neonatal care that they provide. Well, coming up, we've got a short break and then we've got the latest headlines and we'll update you with what's been happening in the World Cup. All that coming up. Stay with us.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
A very good afternoon to you. 2 minutes past 1. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The UK must wean itself off immigration dependency. That's the message from the Labour leader to business bosses. Sir Keir Starmer told the Confederation of Business Industry the days of low pay and cheap labour must end and that it was time to invest in training those already in the UK. He also promised to be pragmatic about the shortage of workers, saying if he gets into government, he's willing to accept increased skilled immigration.
But our common goal must be to help the British economy off its immigration dependency, to start investing more in training workers who are already here. The days when low pay and cheap labour are part of the British way on growth must end. This isn't about Brexit. all around the world, business is waking up to the fact we live in a new era for Labour. And while they're adapting, our low-growth model is holding us back.
Energy suppliers have been named and shamed for failing vulnerable customers, with the regulator Ofgem saying problems across the board needed to be urgently addressed. A review found severe weaknesses at 5 companies: Good Energy, Outfox, SO Energy, True Energy and Utilia. Ofgem says households are missing out on free gas safety checks, and firms aren't doing enough to identify those on prepayment meters who may need financial help. In total, 17 suppliers have been told they need to improve their approach to vulnerable customers. Expats are protesting against a real-term reduction in their UK state pensions. Nearly 500,000 OAPs live in countries that don't have an up-rating agreement with the UK. That means their state pension is frozen at the level of when they started receiving it. Well, the demonstrators say many of them are getting less than half the full state pension of £141 a week.
There are people around the world who are being pushed below the poverty line and are absolutely in desperation because of this lack of pension. Some people are actually existing on pensions as little as £20, £30 a week. It is absolutely impossible to live under these circumstances without relying on charity.
The Deputy Prime Minister is going to be questioned over alleged bullying. Dominic Raab is facing an investigation into 2 formal complaints against him. He's going to face the Justice Committee this afternoon. He's already said he's confident he's behaved professionally and will be cleared of any wrongdoing. At Downing Street this morning, he reiterated his position.
Deputy Prime Minister, are you confident you're going to clear your name? Absolutely.
The Prime Minister's warned MPs they'll have to justify their expenses after being told they'll be allowed to use taxpayers' money to fund staff Christmas parties. Alcohol will be off limits, but the guidance issued by the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority suggests office decorations are included. The move's been widely criticised by voters.
People are doing more than one job a day. People are saving on their heating costs, and especially people like my relatives, some relatives that are pensioners, they're struggling, they're not turning the heating on.
Really out of order. I don't see why we should have to pay for their enjoyment when they're putting everything up.
People have to pay for their own things, organisations and that, they have to pay for their own Christmas parties, so I don't see why they shouldn't fund it with their own earnings, not everyone else's earnings.
One rule for them and one for another. One rule for us and one for them.
I think it's absolutely dreadful. You see the cost of living for everybody. People are struggling. They're not struggling. I think it's disgraceful.
The number of people killed during the Indonesian earthquake has risen to 268. Many of the victims are children. Disaster relief officials say 151 people are still missing. That's a day after the 5.6 magnitude quake hit Western Java. 25 aftershocks have rocked the region, triggering landslides and hampering rescue efforts. The latest figures suggest more than 1,000 people have been injured, 58,000 displaced and 22,000 homes damaged. Back here in the UK, Ofsted says the decline in schools operating at an outstanding level may have happened many years ago. The chiefs told the Commons Education Committee it was no surprise as the schools hadn't been re-inspected for 13, 14, 15 years. The watchdog inspected 370 schools in the last academic year. Of those that were re-inspected, only 17% retained their outstanding grade. The King is hosting his first state visit as monarch. King Charles has welcomed the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa during a ceremony at Horse Guards Parade, before then travelling along the Mall by carriage to Buckingham Palace. The Queen Consort and the Prince and Princess of Wales were also in attendance. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now back to Mark.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed. And coming up in this next hour of GB News Live, we'll be telling you about those patients being prescribed heating as part of a health trial in a bid to help poorer households cope with the cold, talking to a doctor about how that would work. More dialogue with trade unions will be a key part of a Labour government's plans to boost working conditions and the economy. That's the message from Labour's leader Sir Keir Starmer to those business leaders. We'll be speaking to our political correspondent Tom Harwood at Downing Street. And the Justice Secretary Dominic Raab under yet more scrutiny. He's facing MPs at a committee meeting at 2:30. We'll bring you that live. Will there be any more tomatoes being thrown? But first, that cost of living, or perhaps cost of heating, we should call it, crisis with the impact on the most vulnerable across the country. Now, Ofgem has announced today that energy and gas suppliers have been failing struggling customers. And the energy price cap, of course, is set to rise to £3,000 in April 2023, so things could only get worse, it seems. Meanwhile, the NHS has said it's launching a pilot scheme which will pay low-income patients' energy bills as a prescription. They'll have to have a condition that gets worse in the cold, such as a respiratory problem. They want to stop people from becoming even more ill and then admitted to hospital over the winter period, which would cost then the NHS more money. Well, so far, 28 patients have had their energy bills paid for by the NHS, and that is due to expand to 1,150 households shortly. Well, joining us now to discuss how it works is NHS GP Dr. David Lloyd. Dr. Lloyd, thanks very much for joining us. How does this actually get funneled through? Is this going to be part of your budget as an NHS GP practice, or does it come through a separate channel?
Golly, you're asking me really tricky questions. I imagine it'll come out of some central fund, because at the moment it's still a research trial. So there are people that have been given money to pay for their electricity bills who are very much at risk of being part of what we call the early winter deaths, the EWDs. Yeah. And it will be compared very carefully with a similar group of patients who don't get the money. So it's a research trial, but we've known about this since 2017. We know that for every death in the winter because of the cold, there are 8 hospital admissions of people who don't die and 100 GP consultations. So if we can reduce the number of winter deaths we get, we really do take an enormous pressure off the NHS. As a GP, I already prescribe food vouchers to my most needy patients, and there's lots of evidence to suggest that that is a very useful thing to keep people alive. And this seems to me a very useful extension of that. We already provide money to pay for people who use oxygen concentrators and machines to keep their breathing alive, so that they are not a drain on their electricity bills. And this seems to be a logical extension of that, with lots of scientific data to back it up.
So the cost benefit, as you say, but again, with the vouchers that you issue, again, does that come from the NHS health budget? Because people will be scratching their heads saying, well, we thought the NHS was being squeezed more and more. How can they find extra money to put these things through on prescription effectively?
Well, food vouchers are available from a number of different sources, not just from GPs. So they're coming out of a central budget. Again, I'm afraid you're asking me something way above my pay grade. Who actually pays for that money? I promise you, the patients that I give food vouchers to would be dead if they didn't have some kind of subsidy from me.
I mean, it does seem extraordinary that you on the health front line are having to do these social care things as well as looking after medical conditions. But, I mean, I suppose we do remember this recent case of that poor young boy who died because of the mould in that substandard housing. And clearly this underlines the problem if you don't have proper warmth and dry conditions.
Absolutely. We need to think about health as a system problem. It's about this country, and it's about how we deal with and how we help people who are the most vulnerable. And so it's not just about the NHS, it's about society as a whole. And so when you sort of fire criticism at the NHS for doing something which to the Daily Mail might seem loony, it's about keeping this country as healthy as we can and helping everybody. And surely that's what this country is about. It's not about letting the rich carry on getting richer. It's about everybody helping everybody else.
And everyone getting healthier as well. Dr. David Lloyd, thanks for going above your pay grade once more, joining us here on GB News. Thanks very much for your time. Thank you. Now, let's actually reflect on politics once more. As we were saying, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab facing perhaps a grilling later about his behaviour. He's going in front of a committee of MPs amid fresh reports that a top Whitehall official has had to apologise for his behaviour after a meeting. He's already, of course, being investigated after 2 formal complaints about alleged bullying of staff that were made last week. But he has strongly denied those allegations, saying he's confident that he's behaved professionally and actually put himself forward to an independent inquiry, which has not started as yet. Let's get more with our political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, just to reiterate that this committee meeting is not being held to actually scold him in any way. It's actually to do the assessment of where the justice system is and all the delays in the court proceedings that we've got at the moment.
Yes, it's the Justice Select Committee. It's meeting at 2:30, and it will be primarily to do with matters of the Justice Department, court backlogs, etc. We know there's lots of problems caused by COVID, the COVID backlog,
However,
others.
Yeah.
However, given all the allegations swirling around, given there is going to be an investigation when they manage to appoint someone to take it on, it seems inconceivable that MPs, of course these are cross-party MPs, that no questions are going to be asked. So I'm sure that a couple of awkward questions at least will be coming the way of
and that's when it becomes difficult, isn't it? As we saw with Gavin Williamson, as he said in his letter, he becomes a distraction. When they become the story rather than what they're supposed to be doing in their political role, that's when really their time is up, isn't it?
Well, Rishi Sunak has only been Prime Minister. It's 4 weeks today since the King asked him to form a government. It seems impossible, doesn't it? And he said that, you know, the government would have accountancy, transparency and integrity at its heart. And then very quickly, criticism of him appointing Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, after the security breach, all the incidents with Gavin Williamson that led to him resigning, and now Dominic Raab. And these allegations have been going on now for over a week. And today, fresh ones that the top civil servant at the Ministry of Justice, Antonio Romeo, felt obliged to apologise to Home Office officials after a meeting earlier this year when Dominic Raab was Justice Secretary, because his manner and tone, she felt, were inappropriate. And I think she was trying to ward off any sort of formal complaint.
Yeah, OK, so that's still to be addressed. But the other aspect that's you're mentioning Rishi Sunak new in the job, of course, he's now having to warn MPs that they'll have to justify expenses after this stories emerged that MPs are going to be able to charge Christmas parties on their expenses, taxpayers' money, even though they can't charge alcohol. Going back to Partygate, of course, all over again.
It's not a great look, is it, at a time of a real cost of living crisis when people are seriously worried about paying their energy bills, their food bills, that they might be funding MPs' tinsel. But the Prime Minister has apparently asked now that MPs be very mindful of what they're spending, because they will need to justify this to their constituents.
To the voters, and people aren't pleased, as we've been finding out. Let's just reflect on some of these views.
One rule for them and one for another. One rule for us and one for them.
I think it's absolutely dreadful. You see the cost of living for everybody. People are struggling. They're not struggling. I think it's disgraceful.
They're not expensive things, so I mean, they could probably just pay for them themselves like we all do.
And, you know, people are really struggling, so I think it's totally unfair that MPs are allowed to do this.
We've all worked hard all year round and we've not had any pay rises, have we? So, no, it's not right.
I'm a pensioner, I live on my own, so I've got to manage on what I get. So why should they have a Christmas party? They shouldn't. They should think about people who live on their own, who only live on their pension. I can't afford a Christmas party, so they shouldn't have one.
Disgraceful. They shouldn't have a Christmas party. As my friend said, think of us. We struggle on what we get and what pension we get.
I think message received loud and clear. We ought to point out that tinsel is not allowed on their list. Apparently, they can't have the decorations, even though they can have a party. However, it's interesting that the official spokesman, the Prime Minister's official spokesman, when he was asked by reporters, saying, oh, this is all to do with the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, or IPSA, nothing to do with us. So they sort of passed the hot potato back pretty quickly, it seems.
Yes, but voters are not really going to be interested in the whys and wherefores, are they? It's
the MPs.
It's the look. And one other, just very quickly, Rishi Sunak today, it's emerged, has private healthcare. Now, I don't think that's really surprising, given that his family, via his wife, are richer than the King. I think they've got an estimated wealth of about £750 million. It's not surprising, is it, that he has access to private healthcare? But of course, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because at the moment, NHS backlogs, trying to see a GP is tricky for lots of people. So
yeah, and maybe he'll be paying for his own office party. We shall monitor that when it happens, of course. Catherine, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Well, from one political leader to another, Sir Keir Starmer telling businesses that trade unions must be a crucial part of our partnership after addressing the CBI conference in Birmingham on relaxation of migration rules that would come alongside new conditions for business, he said. We can talk about how this is done. Dialogue is at the heart of partnership, said Sir Keir. But with negotiations with trade unions part of it, here's what he had to say in detail.
My Labour Party is unashamedly pro-business. And I say here today that trade unions must be a crucial part of our partnership. But our common goal must be to help the British economy off its immigration dependency, to start investing more in training workers who are already here. Migration is part of our national story, always has been, always will be. And the Labour Party will never diminish the contribution it makes to our economy, to public services, to your businesses and our communities. But let me tell you, the days when low pay and cheap labour are part of the British way on growth must end. This isn't about Brexit. All around the world, business is waking up to the fact we live in a new era for Labour. And while they're adapting, our low-growth model is holding us back.
Well, that was Sir Keir Starmer. Let's speak now to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, in Downing Street. And Tom, I guess a lot of those CBI delegates will be looking at the parallels they heard yesterday from Rishi Sunak on this question of the migration of workers. Pretty similar sentiments, it seems.
They certainly will be. There was a very, very similar line from both Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak on this idea that it is not the right time to sort of open the floodgates and pursue what many in the CBI themselves have been calling for, a wider array of shortage occupation lists, a more liberal approach to migration. Both party leaders saying that was not the way to deliver growth, but also interesting to note some more nuances perhaps in the Labour Party leader's speech than perhaps the headlines may have suggested. Speaking of, if there were to be liberalisations to our migration system, they would need to come in concert with these strengthened employment right protections. So perhaps a quid pro quo there. But it was interesting to hear the wider context of the Labour Party leader's speech, talking at the Confederation of British Industry about trade unions. He said in his speech today that when he addressed the Trade Union Congress earlier this year, he said that working with business was a fundamental part of his Labour approach. And now that he was speaking to businesses today, he said talking with trade unions was a fundamental part of his approach. Now, some people might well say that he's being all things to all people, but the Labour Party leader himself would be saying this is a fusion of the different sort of aspects of the economy, a third way, if you will, harking back to that sort of Tony Blair attitude of the 1990s, combining support for businesses with a relationship with trade unions and indeed a role for government as well, that tripartite way of moving forward and delivering what he described as a new economic model for the country.
Yeah. But that might be difficult for him to pull off, of course, when we are just seeing that Rishi Sunak's now warning of a challenging winter ahead with strikes, particularly, of course, the NHS, the RMT, we understand, is going to reveal more strike dates on transport. For Labour to try and keep public sympathy with the unions, that might be a difficult trick to pull off come the winter.
It may well indeed. Rishi Sunak opened his cabinet meeting this morning, initially talking about, of course, the state visit from the South African president, but secondly talking about how serious the crises that this country faces this winter are. Of course, not only the backlogs in the NHS caused by COVID, up from a small number of 1,000 people waiting over a year for NHS operations to over 400,000 people waiting for those operations. A crisis no doubt going to be compounded by NHS strikes. Also strikes on the transport system, and of course we're seeing cost of living crises with the energy situation and so much more too. The Prime Minister addressing and acknowledging that there are those crises. No doubt in the short term that may well help the Labour Party, but of course the Labour Party sticking by its trade union base may well be tricky politically for them too.
Yeah. Tom in Downing Street, thank you very much indeed. More, of course, as the day progresses. Thanks very much indeed. Well, coming up, a World Cup shock. And it's not the fact that the Wales match actually had more television viewers than the England match. We'll be live with Paul Hawkins in Qatar for the latest. What did this goal do to the World Cup competition?
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Following such a soggy day yesterday for many of us, there'll still be some showers around today, along with a lot of cloud. But for many, actually, it is a drier and eventually a brighter day, although the legacy of yesterday's rain still with us. Low pressure across southern parts of the UK, weather fronts wrapped around that. These are weakening fronts, still providing a lot of low cloud for eastern England, some drizzly bits and pieces, and quite frequent showers into eastern and northern Scotland, even longer spells of rain here. Also some showers pushing into southwest England, parts of Pembrokeshire. But in between, actually, for many, it's a drier day with some sunshine coming through across western areas later on. But it's also going to feel on the cold side, 9 to 11 Celsius. Temperatures a little below average for the time of year. The winds pick up across the far north, Shetland in particular, along with some heavy spells of rain overnight, gales here. But elsewhere, clearing skies, lighter winds and a frost forming, especially across eastern areas, with temperatures in towns and cities down to 2 or 3 Celsius, in the countryside down below 0. But in the west, well, it's not a cold start, because here we've got wind and rain pushing through quite quickly. The band of rain actually moves swiftly across England and Wales during the morning, as well as Northern Ireland, pushes into Scotland by lunchtime, and then it comes to a rest across northern parts of Scotland, whilst sunny spells and showers replace it elsewhere. The most frequent showers will be in the west, with a strong wind, gales around the exposed western coast, but this wind is coming from the southwest, so it's a milder direction. 13 Celsius in the south, 9 to 11 again in the north. Now, it's going to be a blustery night on Wednesday night, with a lot of these showers rushing in from the Atlantic, and there'll be 1 or 2 showers pushing as far as eastern England, eastern Scotland, but most of the showers will be in the west. Further spells of rain coming in eventually on Thursday as well. A brighter day to come on Friday, but more rain on Saturday.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
So, welcome back to GB News Live and a World Cup shock. And it's not the fact that the Wales match got more viewers than the England match. It's the fact that Argentina have been beaten by Saudi Arabia. Yes, you heard that right. Let's go live to Qatar and join our GB News reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's been following the tournament and seeing and greeting those Saudi Arabian fans. They're in sort of disbelief, actually, Paul, I think some of them.
Yeah, they're dancing on the streets of Riyadh, one would imagine, and kind of dancing here on the streets of Doha, quite frankly. Just to put it into context, right, Argentina have won the World Cup twice. They're one of the favourites to win this World Cup. They're coming on the back of a 36-match unbeaten run that stretches back to 2019. So everyone here had them down as almost nailed on to beat Saudi Arabia. So to hear that Saudi Arabia have beaten them 2-1 is undoubtedly one of the greatest World Cup shocks. They're still celebrating over there. There's some big group of Saudi Arabian fans, their flags waving as the sun sets here in the Souk Waqif. But listen, it's going to give all those underdogs, those smaller teams, and Saudi Arabia are one of the lowest ranked teams in the tournament. It's going to give them a lot of heart, especially Wales, who look to kick on from that draw with the USA last night. They're taking on Iran next. England, meanwhile, face the USA. Earlier, when the sun was up, we were chatting to both England and Wales fans about last night's results.
Overall, the team played really well. We've got 3 points, another win to the next round. It's looking pretty good. Yeah.
And I think they win it with a bit of class because they put their foot down first half, got the few goals that they needed, and at the end, yeah, Iran scored a couple of goals, but I think if it was a tight match, they wouldn't have scored. So it was a confident start, and I think, yeah, they'll do well.
Yeah, the most important thing, I have not actually witnessed not one single incident. I've been here from the 18th. Till now, not even one single incident.
Yeah, it was a late night, game of 2 halves. We were worried at half-time and then changed a couple of players. And Gareth Bale came good, and we live for another day. We just got to support England now against the US.
Paul, we saw one of the bucket hats there, the Welsh bucket hats, but there has been some more controversy off the pitch with the rainbow bucket hats, where the authorities have asked people, told people, that they can't wear them.
Yeah, most notably Laura Driscoll. She's a former Wales captain, former actually member of the FIFA Council. She was wearing the traditional Wales hat, but for those that want to represent LGBT rights, it's a rainbow hat as well. And it was taken off her. She still smuggled it into the stadium, but she has gone public about that. The Welsh FA say they're extremely disappointed and they're taking it up with FIFA. We were speaking to some fans earlier and they told us they're sympathetic with her, but they're kind of questioning why she would wear that hat given the attitude towards LGBT rights in this country, and that it was maybe even deemed to be a little bit provocative that she was deliberately doing that to try and make a statement. But the Welsh FA said they're extremely disappointed and we're waiting for a response from FIFA.
Yeah. And another cheer going up behind you in that busy thoroughfare, which seems to be where all the action's occurring. You're in the right spot, it seems. We'll be back to you a bit later, Paul. For the moment, thanks very much indeed. And all the latest, of course, from Qatar. All the latest now from the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 1:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The UK must wean itself off immigration dependency. That's the message from the Labour leader to business bosses. Sir Keir Starmer told the Confederation of Business Industry that the days of low pay and cheap labour must end, and that it's time to invest in training those already in the UK. He's also promised to be pragmatic about the shortage of workers, saying if he gets into government, he's willing to accept increased skilled immigration.
but our common goal must be to help the British economy off its immigration dependency, to start investing more in training workers who are already here. The days when low pay and cheap labour are part of the British way on growth must end. This isn't about Brexit. All around the world, business is waking up to the fact we live in a new era for labour. And while they're adapting, our low-growth model is holding us back.
Energy suppliers have been named and shamed for failing vulnerable customers, with the regulator Ofgem saying problems across the board need to urgently be addressed. A review found severe weaknesses at 5 companies: Good Energy, Outfox, SO Energy, True Energy and Utilia. In total, though, 17 suppliers have been told they need to improve their approach to vulnerable customers. Expats are protesting against a real-term reduction in their UK state pensions. Nearly 500,000 OAPs live in countries that don't have an up-rating agreement with the UK. That means their state pensions frozen at the level when they started receiving the payments. The demonstrators say many of them are getting less than half the full state pension of £141 a week. The King is hosting his first state visit as monarch. King Charles has welcomed the South African President, Cyril Ramaphosa, during a ceremony at Horse Guards Parade. They then proceeded along the Mall by carriage to Buckingham Palace, where a banquet will be held in the President's honour. President Ramaphosa will also address Parliament and meet with the Prime Minister. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1897 and €1.1582. The price of gold is £1,468.05 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,425 points.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narinda.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Now, nearly 500,000 UK pensioners living overseas, mostly in the Commonwealth, will be excluded from the annual state pension increase. That's because they live in a country without any uprating agreement with the UK. It means their state pension is effectively frozen at the level it was when they left the UK. Well, today, a delegation of UK state pensioners from across the world flew to London to hand in letters and to protest outside the Department for Work and Pensions. Let's get more with our national reporter, Ellie Costello, who's been speaking to some of those protesters. And, Ellie, it's not just the protesters. I think about 60 MPs and Lords have written to the government as well in support of their action.
Yes, that's exactly right, Mark, and they call it a gross injustice. This is something that's been going on for 30 years and they want it to be fixed. And the message from all of them is it would be very easy to do so. They are asking for domestic legislation that would allow for British expats, British veterans, those living in Commonwealth countries that have paid into a British state pension to receive an up-rated pension. That means that it rises with inflation. And in 150 countries around the world, that is not yet the case. A pension is frozen at the time when that pensioner first started taking out that pension. So for some elderly pensioners all around the world, specifically in Canada and Australia, where most of these 500,000 pensioners are now living, they can be on as little as £25 or £26 a week. That is why we're seeing this small delegation come to Westminster today. They're flown in from all around the world and they are here to represent those 500,000 pensioners whose pensions currently do not go up in line with inflation. And one of those people is Sheila Telford. Now, she has flown in from Canada this morning and she told me why she was here.
I worked in Britain pretty much all my life, and then with my husband we came to Canada as we were posted by a British company. I discovered that my pension was frozen and was horrified at this issue and became a campaigner now 22 years ago. I've been working for this anomaly in British pensions, frozen British pensions, for 22 years, and I feel absolutely passionately that this injustice has to be addressed. In my particular case, I have a brother who lives in the US, and he's a year younger than me, and his pension is uprated every year, and mine is not. So this becomes even more ludicrous. You start looking at places like the US Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands. They're the same string of islands, and yet frozen in the British ones and indexed in the American ones. Crazy. Inflation is a fact of life everywhere in the world, and so absolutely there are people around the world who are being pushed below the poverty line and are absolutely in desperation because of this lack of pension. Some people are actually existing on pensions as little as £20-30 a week. It is absolutely impossible to live under these circumstances without relying on charity. So this has to be resolved. We are determined that it will be resolved. We are passionate about it, and we have many, many supporters in the United Kingdom and around the world to make sure that this finally happens.
Well, that's Sheila Telford there, who is a pensioner now living in Canada but worked in Britain most of her life. And what you can really get from Sheila there is, first of all, her passion for this, but also her shock. She didn't realise that her pension would be frozen. And we're talking here about some of the Windrush generation. Those that came here after the Second World War have now gone back to the Caribbean and their pensions are not in line with inflation, many of them living below the poverty line. We're also talking about veterans, those who served in the Falklands or even in the Second World War. It does seem as though, and that's especially what Sheila was saying there, that it's a geographical lottery, and that's why so many of these pensioners have arrived here in Westminster today. They want to raise this issue, especially in the cost of living crisis, with some of these pensioners around the world living on as little as £25 a week. This issue to them is more prevalent than ever, and they handed in that letter to the Department of Work and Pensions today, simply asking why aren't our pensions uprated. They say they've paid into these pensions their whole working lives, and now they simply want the pensions that they are owed.
Indeed. Ellie, thank you very much indeed, of course, and we'll see if the government does move on that, as you say, much pressure on them now, or the Treasury at least. Thanks very much indeed. Now, let's update you on other political matters, with the Prime Minister warning MPs they'll have to justify their expenses to voters after they were told for the first time they could charge the taxpayer for their Christmas parties. It's caused some reaction. Prime Minister's spokesman saying he certainly doesn't intend to put food, refreshments and decorations on expenses for office parties at number 10. But indeed, in this lead up to Christmas, many people worried about the rising costs of living, the price of Christmas food in particular, and gifts for loved ones. But at a Christmas market in Belfast, traders are hoping that people can still get into the spirit of the season, as Doogie Beattie now reports for us.
Sights and smells that signal Christmas is on its way. But even the councils are counting their pennies and hoping that the retailers are going to recover from the lockdown restrictions that kept revenue down. Over the next couple of weekends, Christmas tree lights will be lit across the UK. Here in Belfast, it was a very low-key ceremony in order to keep costs down. The 18th annual Christmas market is now well underway. It brings millions into the local economy, as it's one of only two on the island of Ireland. Traders here are hoping that the cost of living doesn't bite just so tight.
Oh, we love Belfast. It's amazing. It's the first time we've been here. We've never been to Belfast before. We've never traded here. The people are super friendly and the city is super clean.
Cheryl Rudman is a South African who is hoping that her culinary delights may catch on in the Belfast market.
Of course, the cost of living is getting so expensive. People sometimes feel that they might splash out a little bit more on smaller things, and just give themselves a bit of joy by walking around, having something different to eat, eating out, every third night or fourth night and popping down to the market, to see what it's about. We have something here called bunny chow, which is literally a loaf of bread, half a loaf, which scoop out the middle, the inside, and then we stuff it full of curry. That's in South Africa. There's a province, Durban, and that's mainly a Durban dish type of style.
Abdul Shafarnas has traded here for many years and says that they are keeping prices down and people are still buying.
Honestly, it's not affecting people. We're trying ourselves as well to not to put the prices up, even though this is handcrafted, but we're taking into consideration what's going on. We have to help each other.
The market is an attraction that brings footfall into Belfast, and the city will be anxious to keep shoppers there. But the rising energy costs have seen downscaling of lights throughout the area, and retailers are hopeful that the Christmas feeling doesn't dim. Doogie Beattie, GB News, Belfast.
Well, some lights shining bright at least. Now, almost a fifth of NHS trusts have been rated red for infant mortality rates, according to a national audit. A total of 23 trusts received the red rating from Mothers and Babies Reducing Risk Through Audit and Confidential Inquiries, or EMBRACE for short. Now, it means the death rate for 2020 more than 5% above the average for other countries. EMBRACE also looked at stillbirths and deaths within 4 weeks of birth, with 229 mums dying alongside 27 babies, rather. That's between 2018 and 2020. Well, many of those deaths were deemed avoidable. That's the main point being made. We're joined now by Lucy Johnson, health editor at the Sunday Express. And Lucy, of course, we have had these reports of maternity units, very short staff, but it does seem, looking at some of the data, there are other things at play here.
Yes, so this analysis is very shocking, and we are going in the wrong direction. It's not, it's got worse over recent years. So unpicking the data and looking at other sort of studies in the area, we can see that one spike, which has been, very recent, is suicide among mothers. So we know that some women can have psychosis after a birth, and there's been about an 18% rise in suicides among young mothers between 2018 and 2020. Looking sort of at what are the leading causes, there's been an increase as well in heart disease, which as we know is often linked to obesity, and included in this is we see women of ethnic minorities are about 3.7 times more likely to die after labour, in the weeks and up to a year after labour. So there's lots of things to look at, and perhaps we need to have an investigation into why our maternal and infant mortality is so high and has been rising.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking, isn't it? But just on the sort of investigative element, Dorset was one of those areas examined, and the Dorset Health Authority involved said they'd examined the evidence and found no consistent theme. So, I mean, this is the difficulty, I guess, in trying to find out what should be done overall.
Well, I think if you talk to the Royal College of Midwives, they would argue that we have about 2,000 midwives short. We know that our health service has got staffing problems, and also the Care Quality Commission, which examines health areas, health service, has done a recent report which showed that 2/5 of maternity care services were rated substandard. So even though it's difficult to know exactly what's going on, we do know that we have substandard care and a shortage of staff. And so we need to make proper improvements in that area. And not only that, midwives, if we are short of midwives, they are being pulled away to look after women in labour, when in fact we need staff to look after women post-labour and in the year and months after that. So we have shortage of that, and health visitors too. There's a lot of problems that can occur.
Yeah, so it's not just the process of the birth in the hospital and what happens sometimes in emergency care. It's looking after mum and baby for, sometimes weeks or if not more afterwards.
Precisely, and a lot of deaths. We've had hundreds of deaths in the weeks after birth, but also some of the countries that were assessed have data that goes beyond those 42 weeks after birth, and that shows that women were dying by suicide or by heart disease in the year after birth. So that needs to be looked at, and we also know from the data that many of the figures, there's a massive underestimate. About 40% aren't ever recorded. So this could be the tip of the iceberg.
Worrying figures indeed. Lucy, as ever, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your interpretation and analysis. Thanks very much indeed. Lucy Johnson, health editor at the Sunday Express. Well, just to update you, in a statement, NHS England have said that this Embrace data demonstrates significant progress that has been made to reduce stillbirths and neonatal deaths since 2010. But we know further action is needed to ensure continued safe care for all women, babies and their families. The statement went on to say, NHS England continues to support trusts and integrated care boards to make improvements to the maternity and neonatal care they provide. Now, the King has hosted his first state visit as monarch, welcoming the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, and King Charles and Camilla Queen Consort hosting a lunch at Buckingham Palace at the moment. And that's, of course, the Prince and Princess of Wales who welcomed the President to Buckingham Palace first before heading to Horse Guards parade, where there was an official guard of honour. There'll be a state banquet tonight with the President's two-day trip. Well, the President will be enjoying, or has been enjoying, 200 horses and 1,000 soldiers, led by No. 7 Company, taking part in that military parade. Gun salutes being fired from Green Park, which we brought you a little earlier. Let's get an update now with our royal correspondent Cameron Walker outside Canada Gate at Green Park, close to Buckingham Palace, where they've got an informal lunch, which may be some relief given what we understand will be a pretty full-on state banquet tonight.
Certainly is, Mark. This is the royal family's power of soft diplomacy in action. It's the first state visit that the UK has hosted since President Trump's visit in 2019. But more crucially, it is the King Charles III's first state visit, which he has hosted as our sovereign. Now, Her Majesty the Queen hosted more than 100 state visits during the course of her reign, and I understand that this state visit of South Africa was in the early stages of planning before Her Majesty's sad death back in September, but I'm told that King Charles was very much wanting to continue with the plans for this state visit of South Africa. Of course, it's a chance for the British government and the royal family to strengthen the ties between the two nations of South Africa and the United Kingdom. Now, usually the President of South Africa would be staying inside Buckingham Palace for the course of a 2-day state visit. That isn't happening this time, as I understand it, and that's because Buckingham Palace is in the middle of a 10-year resurfacing programme, so he's staying in a luxury hotel instead, somewhere in central London. But today it was all about the pomp and ceremony of Great Britain, starting off at Horse Guards Parade with an official ceremonial welcome involving more than 1,000 soldiers, 230 horses. The King and the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, inspected the troops, number 7 Coldstream Guards. There was also gun salutes in Green Park at the Tower of London as well. He had the chance to be introduced to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and Foreign Secretary James Cleverly by the King. And then there was a magnificent state carriage ride from Horse Guards Parade to here at Buckingham Palace, using the Irish state coach and the Australian state coach as well, accompanied by the Prince and Princess of Wales too. As you mentioned, Mark, there is a private lunch going on inside Buckingham Palace at the moment. There will then be a visit to Westminster Abbey as well as the Houses of Parliament, followed by a magnificent state banquet tonight involving around 150 guests.
Right. And we know how important the Commonwealth, of course, was to the late Queen Elizabeth. And you've spoken about soft power and the importance of these state visits. But it's interesting that Rishi Sunak has talked about this joint deal with South Africa on infrastructure, some £5.37 billion to turbocharge economic growth together, he said.
Yes, it's a lot of money. South Africa is, of course, the largest trading partner of the United Kingdom within the continent of Africa. And don't forget, Mark, it's actually the Foreign Office which extends the invites to the presidents of South Africa rather than the royal family. Yes, the royal family are hosting, but I think it's the chance of the governments to have these talks behind the scenes during the 2-day state visits which will be particularly significant. Tomorrow, the president is expected to have a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak inside number 10 Downing Street, where no doubt these kind of trade talks will be continuing. But as for the royal family, it's their role to be the host, as you like, give the hospitality, the pomp, the spectacle inside Buckingham Palace, and not be too overly political, almost buttering up the foreign head of state to then go to Downing Street and the Houses of Parliament to meet with elected politicians to really thrash out these trade negotiations, to deepen the ties between the United Kingdom and South Africa.
Indeed, and of course South Africa itself suffering economic problems at the moment, as we are. Cameron, down at Canada Gate, thanks very much for updating us on this first state visit of King Charles's reign. Thank you very much indeed. Now let's reflect on your views on all the issues of the day. First on the politics and the football, all mixed together, of course, in Qatar at the moment. Angela's written to say, if England and Wales wanted to make a statement against the laws and way of life in Qatar, then they should not have gone, she said in capital letters. Why should Qatar change their laws for us? We have no right to tell them what to do. By the same token, those coming here from other countries should not expect us to change our laws. This country needs to stop appeasing Qatar. On MPs' expenses and the Christmas parties, Maria says we need to give the MPs a break. Businesses have been giving out expenses, allowances, tax breaks, etc. for years. I don't know why MPs can be bothered to do the job. They can do nothing right. Well, thank you for all those views. Keep the emails coming in, as ever, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Coming up, we'll be telling you what Sir Keir Starmer has been telling business leaders and why it sounds quite similar to what Rishi Sunak was saying. The latest from Qatar on the World Cup and pension protests in the capital. All that coming up. Right now, it's time for the weather update.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Following such a soggy day yesterday for many of us, there'll still be some showers around today, along with a lot of cloud. But for many, actually, it is a drier and eventually a brighter day, although the legacy of yesterday's rain still with us. Low pressure across southern parts of the UK, weather fronts wrapped around that. These are weakening fronts. still providing a lot of low cloud for eastern England, some drizzly bits and pieces, and quite frequent showers into eastern and northern Scotland, even longer spells of rain here. Also some showers pushing into southwest England, parts of Pembrokeshire. But in between, actually, for many, it's a drier day with some sunshine coming through across western areas later on. But it's also going to feel on the cold side, 9 to 11 Celsius. Temperatures a little below average for the time of year. The winds pick up across the far north, Shetland in particular, along with some heavy spells of rain overnight, gales here. But elsewhere, clearing skies, lighter winds and a frost forming, especially across eastern areas, with temperatures in towns and cities down to 2 or 3 Celsius, in the countryside down below 0. But in the west, well, it's not a cold start because here we've got wind and rain pushing through quite quickly. The band of rain actually moves swiftly across England and Wales during the morning, as well as Northern Ireland, pushes into Scotland by lunchtime, and then it comes to a rest across northern parts of Scotland, whilst sunny spells and showers replace it elsewhere. The most frequent showers will be in the west with a strong wind, gales around the exposed western coast, but this wind is coming from the southwest, so it's a milder direction, 13 Celsius in the south, 9 to 11 again in the north. Now, it's going to be a blustery night on Wednesday night with a lot of these showers rushing in from the Atlantic, and there'll be 1 or 2 showers pushing as far as eastern England, eastern Scotland, but most of the showers will be in the west. Further spells of rain coming in eventually on Thursday as well. A brighter day to come on Friday, but more rain on Saturday.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
And welcome to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up this hour, the UK's economy needs to wean itself off cheap foreign workers. That's according to the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. He's been speaking to business leaders at the CBI's annual conference. We'll have the latest reaction. Energy firms are failing vulnerable customers. That's according to the sector's watchdog. And it's warned some firms have set debt repayments so high that customers could not top up their prepayment meters to take that level of debt. We'll have the latest reaction to that. Plus, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab under more scrutiny, being accused of using offensive language towards colleagues. He's now set to face MPs at a committee hearing this hour. We'll have that live for you. But before that, the latest news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date.
The UK must wean itself off immigration dependency. That's the message from the Labour leader to business bosses. Sir Keir Starmer told the Confederation of Business Industry the days of low pay and cheap labour must end, and it's time to invest in training those already in the UK. He's also promised to be pragmatic about the shortage of workers, saying if he gets into government, he's willing to accept increased skilled immigration.
But our common goal must be to help the British economy off its immigration dependency, to start investing more in training workers who are already here. The days when low pay and cheap labour are part of the British way on growth must end. This isn't about Brexit. All around the world, business is waking up to the fact we live in a new era for Labour. And while they're adapting, our low-growth model is holding us back.
Energy suppliers have been named and shamed for failing vulnerable customers, with the regulator Ofgem saying problems across the board needed to be urgently addressed. A review found severe weaknesses at 5 companies: Good Energy, Outfox, SO Energy, True Energy and Utilia. Ofgem says households are missing out on free gas safety checks. Firms aren't doing enough to identify those on prepayment meters who may need help. In total, 17 suppliers have been told they need to improve their approach to vulnerable customers. Nottinghamshire police have said the mother of 2 young children who were killed in a fire flat has died. The case is now being treated as a triple murder. Fatima Hydra had been on life support after the blaze in Fair Isle Close in Clifton on early Sunday morning. The children, who are aged 1 and 3, were treated at the scene for smoke inhalation, but later died in hospital. Detectives have been given another 36 hours to question a 31-year-old man on suspicion of killing the family. Expats are protesting against a real term reduction in their UK state pensions. Nearly 500,000 OAPs live in countries that don't have an uprating agreement with the UK. That means their state pensions frozen at the level when they started receiving it. The demonstrators say many of them are getting less than half the full state pension of £141 a week.
There are people around the world who are being pushed below the poverty line and are absolutely in desperation because of this lack of pension. Some people are actually existing on pensions as little as £20, £30 a week. It is absolutely impossible to live under these circumstances without relying on charity.
The Deputy Prime Minister is going to be questioned over alleged bullying. Dominic Raab is facing an investigation into 2 formal complaints against him. It's going to face the Justice Committee this afternoon. He's already said he's confident he behaved professionally and will be cleared of any wrongdoing. At Downing Street this morning, he reiterated his position.
Deputy Prime Minister, are you confident you're going to clear your name?
Absolutely. The Prime Minister's warned MPs they'll have to justify their expenses after being told they'll be allowed to use taxpayers' money to fund staff Christmas parties. Alcohol will be off limits, but the guidance issued by the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority suggests office decorations are included. The move's been widely criticised by voters.
People are doing more than one job a day. People are saving on their heating costs, and especially people like my relatives, some relatives that are pensioners, they're struggling, they're not turning the heating on.
Really out of order. I don't see why we should have to pay for their enjoyment when they're putting everything up.
People have to pay for their own things, organisations and that, they have to pay for their own Christmas parties, so I don't see why they shouldn't fund it with their own earnings, not everyone else's earnings.
One rule for them and one for another. One rule for us and one for them.
I think it's absolutely dreadful. You see the cost of living for everybody. People are struggling. They're not struggling. I think it's disgraceful.
The number of people killed during the Indonesian earthquake has risen to 268. Many of the victims are children. Disaster relief officials say 151 people are still missing a day after the 5.6 magnitude quake that hit Western Java. 25 aftershocks have rocked the region, triggering landslides and hampering rescue efforts. The latest figures suggest more than 1,000 people have been injured, 58,000 displaced and 22,000 homes damaged. Ericsson says it will invest tens of millions of pounds in the UK to boost research into 6G connectivity. The company says researchers will work with PhD students to create next-generation networks. An exact figure for the 10-year investment hasn't been confirmed, but the technology is set to become available in the 2030s. The government's welcomed the move, describing it as a huge vote of confidence in the UK. The King is hosting his first state visit as monarch. King Charles has welcomed the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa during a ceremony at Horse Guards Parade. They then proceeded along the Mall by carriage to Buckingham Palace, where a banquet will be held in the President's honour. President Ramaphosa will also address Parliament and meet with the Prime Minister. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Mark.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has accused the government of having archived Britain's growth while addressing the UK's business leaders. Speaking at the CBI's conference in Birmingham, the Labour leader criticised Jeremy Hunt's autumn statement, claiming that when it comes to tough decisions, the Conservative Party do not have it in them, he said. Let's listen to what he had to say in more detail.
Last week, you saw the sum total of their offer on growth. Stagnation dressed up in the clothes of stability. Decline paraded as tough decisions. Tough decisions will be challenging their party on planning, on onshore wind, on industrial strategy. But they don't have it in them. Don't understand that to be a careful steward of the economy in a volatile world, you need to be proactive, need to intervene to secure stability and growth. I'll put it simply. Every business in this room has a strategy for growth. A nation needs one too. Because the headwinds we face, climate change, artificial intelligence, caring for an ageing society, mean that a hands-off approach just isn't fit for purpose anymore. And I'm not going to give up on growth that easily.
Sir Keir Starmer speaking to the CBI at Birmingham. Let's head back to Westminster now and join Chris Heaton-Harris, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who's there for us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on College Green there. You haven't got it in you, said Sir Keir.
Oh, well, I hope he wasn't talking about me. Of course we have. I mean, Sir Keir's very good at just giving kind of headline quotes out, but he has absolutely no policies behind what he says he intends to do. I mean, he talked about immigration, but for ages he and his party have been voting against the measures that we've been trying to take to control immigration into our country. I saw Labour launch a small boat strategy the other day. It literally had no words attached to it. So, we do have a direction for our country. We do know where we want to go. We do know what we want to see from this country, and we are also dealing with a whole host of issues that no government could have planned for. No government could have planned for the COVID pandemic.
Right.
And no government could have planned for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. These are things that
where is that direction heading for, Secretary of State, when the UK's economy will contract more than any of the world's 7 most advanced nations? That's according to the OECD. We're going nowhere, they're saying.
Well, the financial statement, the autumn statement last week, the Office of Budgetary Responsibility said that the measures that we took then mean our recession will be shallower than it would have been. We've protected 70,000 jobs by taking those measures, and that growth will come back into our economy in 2024 and beyond in a very strong way at 2% and above. So these are absolutely challenging times. No one will deny that, and there are a whole host of factors, big and small, that have contributed to this. Our plan is for growth, and our plan is showing us that we'll grow in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, can I just remind you that the OECD is saying that the UK is facing a prolonged recession, as you were saying. I mean, next year, shrinking 0.4% before that growth comes in. But this is the point, saying that the world economy will avoid the same fate. Have you done the right thing in the autumn statement by going for so many tax rises?
So The IMF have said that a third of the world's economies will be in recession at some point in the next year. So this is not a uniquely United Kingdom issue. And we've had to cut our cloth, like every family up and down this country. Government money is not money the government generates. It's taxpayers' money. We have to cut our cloth accordingly, and that's what we've done in the autumn statement.
Talking of taxpayers' money, will you be taking the offer of MPs' expenses to give a Christmas party at your office?
No, and I don't think anybody else will who are MPs. You can see if anybody has done, because IPSA, who are the independent body who set MPs' pay and expenses, have said this today. They actually publish all MPs' expenses every quarter. So if people want to go to the website and look at MPs' expenses from a year ago, pretty sure they'll see that no MP has done this, and no MP is likely to.
Yeah, indeed. Are some MPs actually scratching their heads as to why IPSA have actually announced this, given what's happening elsewhere in the economy?
I think a lot of MPs are wondering why this has been mentioned at this particular time. I mean, I'm yet to find an MP who actually thought this was a reasonable, sensible idea. No one's been asking for this, and IPSA are independent, so how they behave is down to them. But it is just ridiculous.
Now, our reporter Doogie Beattie was in Belfast at a Christmas market where they're cutting their cloth accordingly and trying to cope with things. Where are we in terms of the discussions with the EU on the protocol and what happens with Northern Ireland and the rest of the island of Ireland?
Yeah, well, those talk. I mean, we're in a much better place than where we were not so many months ago. There's been. Every viewer watching this will know that actually to have any sort of relationship, to do any deal with anybody, whether it's in business, in life, or indeed if you're a government, you need to have good personal relationships with the people you're talking to. You have to have trust and respect between both parties. That has been lacking in our relationship on both sides between the UK and the European Union, and that has changed. Our relationship with Ireland is much stronger than it's been for a very long time, and our relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Commissioner, and European Commission who are doing these negotiations, have massively improved. So these talks are ongoing. The Foreign Secretary leads on them on behalf of the government, and I'm a glass half full man. I truly believe we can get a result here on the Northern Ireland Protocol, which would be good news for the people in Northern Ireland, because it means we could get an executive back to make decisions about their local services, health service and other things, which have deteriorated whilst there's not been an executive function.
Indeed. And obviously you were talking about the whole issue of getting the elections going to try and get that dynamic going. I mean, when do you believe Stormont could be back in action and they are addressing all those issues that Northern Ireland needs?
Well, I mean, personally, I think they can go back in now, but
but that won't happen.
The major unionist party
because of the DUP's position, will it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no. So I was just about to say. I was honestly just about to say that won't happen whilst we've got this issue with the Northern Ireland Protocol. So we know, and the European Commission knows, that we have to solve this issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol, so goods can flow freely into Northern Ireland as they would do throughout the rest of, as they do now throughout the rest of Great Britain. So there's no issues over state aid or VAT, and so the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, is not the ultimate arbiter of all these disputes. But everybody knows what needs to be solved, but we do need to have, and we now have, better relationships to solve them, and I'm really hoping we can move on this as quickly as possible.
Chris Heaton-Harris, thank you very much indeed for your time and coping with all the sirens in the background as well. Much appreciated. Thanks for your time in GB News. Thank you. Now, let's update you on the other issues. On the speech at the CBI, we can now speak to lecturer in British politics at the University of Liverpool, David Jeffrey. David, I don't know if you were hearing there what Chris Heaton-Harris had to say, but just to go back in detail as to what Sir Keir said in that speech at Birmingham, wanting a pragmatic approach to economic migration, also talking about a new partnership with business. It sounds as if he's trying to steal the Tories' clothes to a degree.
Oh, exactly. I mean, we can see in the polls there's massive dissatisfaction amongst Conservative voters about the way the government is handling not just the migrant crisis across the Channel, but immigration more broadly. I mean, since 2010, we've been promised migration down to the tens of thousands, and it's just not happened. Even when we voted to leave the EU, migration continued just from outside of the EU. So he's clearly spotted a chance here to come in and steal some Conservative voters with this pitch. Although it's important to note that he didn't quite promise to reduce inward migration, just to be a little bit cleverer about it. So he's kind of walking a tricky balance there, because obviously many of his own voters are quite a fan of inward migration. So he's trying to play a clever one for sure.
But looking at the bigger picture, though, we're discussing obviously this OECD report with Chris Heaton-Harris there. And Keir Starmer saying, or acknowledging, that Labour policies may have to be shelved as a result of the economic conditions when or if they get to number 10. I mean, it's that phrase again, the cupboard is bare.
Yeah, he's certainly trying to leave himself as much scope as possible. I mean, and that's a good idea for an opposition, because you don't want to box yourself in too much, especially before an election. So you don't want to come across as very austere now, when in a year or so we might be in a better place economically, and you already committed yourself to being quite quite tough on the public finances. So he's playing a very good game, and he's certainly grown into being leader of the opposition over the last few years.
Looking ahead now to a general election, which we'll get in 2 years or perhaps under, are the battle lines now starting to actually emerge, even given the big story, of course, is the economy?
I think for Labour, certainly, it will be the Conservatives have wrecked the economy, don't trust them to rebuild it. We can do a much better job, and we'll do it in a more fair way. For the Conservatives, though, not quite. They'll be hoping that over the next year or year and a half, the economy will pick up, and they might be able to play the same trick as John Major in 1992, which was, yes, we did crush the economy, but we're also delivering the green shoots of recovery. So trust us and stick with our plan, and we'll see it through. They'll be hoping things do get better.
David Jeffrey, Dr. David Jeffrey, lecturer in British politics, University of Liverpool, thanks very much indeed. And we'll speak to you again as we see what emerges in these months ahead. But let's get a bit more analysis now on the economic picture. Of course, Shell announcing that they're reconsidering their £25 billion investment in UK energy after the government made that decision in the autumn statement to increase windfall up to some 35% and going longer, another 3 years to 2028. We're speaking at the CBI's conference in Birmingham. Shell's UK chair saying, we're going to have to evaluate each project on a case-by-case basis. When you tax more, you're going to have less disposable income in your pocket, less to invest. Of course, as we were saying, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt last week announcing that tax increasing up to 35%. Let's speak now to Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. Vicky, thanks for joining us once more. And it's not just Shell, of course, BP as well, but we do remember both companies returning money to shareholders, indicating that at that stage they had more money than they knew what to do with.
Well, absolutely. Now, of course, we need to remember that those shareholders may include a number of our pension funds on whom quite a lot of pensioners depend for their pensions, of course. So we mustn't look at that necessarily all in a negative way. But it's absolutely true that they have not been using necessarily that money to invest, although Shell claims it did invest something like £400 million worth in the last quarter. So there is some investment which is being planned, of course, ahead. And the concern is that because of the windfall tax, less of it may happen and they will reconsider. But in reality, a lot of those investments are very long term. The windfall tax is meant to be just for a period of time, yes, to 2028, which is quite long, and it's likely to raise something like 40 billion over that period. It's calculated at present. Much will depend on what happens to oil prices too. But the reality is a lot of those oil companies have not been paying any tax for a while now because they can claim all sorts of it back when they invest, first of all, and the part of the windfall tax arrangement is such that they can claim a very large percentage, almost all of it, back. And also, of course, they have been able to charge anything that they've done in relation to decommissioning old North Sea oil and gas fields back from the government, with the result that, for example, Shell didn't pay any tax, hardly any tax last year to the UK government.
So are they crying wolf?
Well, I think it's right to say that if you're looking at where to invest, the tax regime does matter. But the truth is that a lot of those investments are long term. And also, we don't just know when you're making an investment. I used to work in an oil company myself, and I used to do all this long-term scenario planning for them. What the circumstances are going to be. You make an assumption about prices, you make an assumption about exchange rate, you of course make an assumption about what type of regime there might be in the place where you're doing most of your extraction. But everything could change over the period in which you're doing it. So this is a temporary tax, long-term, longer than perhaps had been hoped for by some of these companies originally, but nevertheless a temporary one. And they can be in no certainty about what a new regime might be. So you don't base your decisions on what is happening right now. You base your decisions on some assumptions of what may be happening in the future, and you look at the sort of scenarios and decide accordingly.
And to talk about those assumptions and the bigger picture and the doom and gloom, of course, we've got the OECD now saying the UK economy will contract more than the world's 7 most advanced nations. But one line that caught my eye was that the UK is facing a prolonged recession, but the world economy will avoid the same fate. I mean, is it that we've dug ourselves a deeper hole than we needed to?
I think we have done. And if you look at which countries are likely to see a recession, there will be a number in Europe as well, including Germany. But of course, Germany has had extra problems. We haven't had those extra problems. The extra problems in Germany are a very substantial cut in its gas supplies, which may lead to Russian gas and energy in the winter. So they have a particular reason why they are not doing, or they will not be doing particularly well, even though they've done okay so far, better than we have in the last quarter, for example. But nevertheless, I mean, what you need to look at when you're looking at the global environment is that there are some countries that are benefiting from this, such as Saudi Arabia, for example, which also did rather well today in the World Cup, by the way. But also, commodity producers have done reasonably well. It is absolutely true that a large part of the globe is not going to do well. And that is probably, if you're balancing them out, why they think that the global economy will not go through it. But also, I think there are some very important issues. We are raising taxes and having quite a tough fiscal budget right now, while we're also raising interest rates. In a number of other countries that we're comparing ourselves with, they're not doing that. They're raising interest rates, yes, but they're actually being much more lenient on the fiscal side than we are. And that's one of the reasons why we're likely to be doing worse.
Vicky, as ever, thank you very much indeed. And Vicky's given the game away on our next tease, the World Cup shock. Yes, it is to do with Saudi Arabia. We'll tell you that in detail as we go live to Qatar. Let's take a short break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
And so to a major upset in the World Cup. And it's not Wales getting a bigger television audience than the England match. It's the fact that Saudi Arabia, yes, Saudi Arabia, have stunned pre-tournament favourites Argentina with a 2-1 victory. And, of course, England also making a strong start yesterday with their 6-2 victory against Iran. And in terms of the other home nations, Wales managing to salvage a point against the United States courtesy of this Gareth Bale penalty. But the headline today is certainly Argentina and Lionel Messi. Let's get the latest from Qatar and our reporter there, Paul Hawkins, who's in the souk in the dark now, as Lionel Messi may be. Sports reporters here, or sports correspondents, Paul saying, is this the end for the 35-year-old who looked his age and proved he cannot carry Argentina anymore? Ouch.
Who says that sports reporting is prone to just a little bit of hype? Equally, England are going to win the World Cup after they thrash Iran 6-2, and so Argentina are now they're going out of the World Cup after one game, aren't they? Let's just calm down a little bit. Well, there's still 2 games to go in the group, but it is wide open. And look, let's not downplay it. It's a huge shock, right? Argentina coming off the back of 36-match unbeaten run. They haven't been beaten since 2019. Playing Saudi Arabia, ranked lower than Qatar, one of the lowest ranked teams in the tournament. It's going to be an Argentina win, right, wrong. First of all, Messi scores, gets a penalty, and then after that, they had 2 goals disallowed. But Saudi Arabia, fair play to them, pushed on, they played a high line, and they got 2 incredible goals as well. Not 2 fluky goals, they played really well, and Argentina fans are in tears. The question is, what was it like in the stadium? And we have to say, Saudi Arabia fans here, marching up and down here in Doha. There's lots of Saudi fans here because Saudi Arabia shares a border with Qatar, so you could probably hear them from Riyadh, not far away, the capital of Saudi Arabia. But we can speak to someone who was there himself, someone who was in the stadium. This is John from the United States. John, thanks for speaking to us.
Yeah, of course, happy to.
First of all, you and your dad are here, right?
Yep.
You got tickets to go to see Saudi Arabia against Argentina. You were expecting a pretty one-sided affair, right?
Yeah, for sure. We were going kind of see Messi do his thing and probably see Argentina win like 4-0 and end up seeing an incredible upset. So it was wild. The stadium was probably 75% Saudi Arabia fans, and when they scored that second goal, I haven't seen anything that loud in a while. It was a great game, fun to be at, but we're really now turning the page, hoping for USA England on Friday. We're getting ready for that here.
Yeah, well, before I ask you about that, just very quickly, what was last night like against Wales?
Yeah, it was a great game. I mean, US scored that first goal, and we were feeling really good, and then the second half, Wales came out and just kind of took control of the game a little. Yeah. We'll take the point, but I think now it puts a lot of pressure on the U.S. team for Friday.
Yeah, well, and how are you feeling about that?
We feel good. I mean, England, it's tough, right? We've had some good results against them in the World Cup in the past, but I'll take a point and then turn to Iran in our last game. So we'll see. Yeah. We got a young team. They're, a lot of them are playing in England now, so hopefully they can step up.
And building towards the next World Cup, which is in the States.
Yeah, it'll be great to have it. I think Americans are going to be pumped to have this here back home in the U.S. and get all those fans from across the world to come to our country.
You've seen one shot today. Later on, you're going to see France, Australia again.
Yeah. I mean, that could be. I mean, we'll see if we get another upset. I don't know if the magic's going to last, but France looks pretty good. But we'll see if we get another great game tonight.
Thanks for speaking to us, John.
Yeah, of course.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
John's off to France, Australia. There's also Denmark against Tunisia today, and Mexico against Poland. So look, there's lots of games to pack in over the next few days. The England and Wales team taking a break then before they play again on Friday.
Just a thought, Paul. What about the Qataris themselves, given what's happened now with Saudi Arabia? Because, of course, after that first match, a lot of people left the stadium earlier. And is this going to re-engage them with the tournament?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I think it does because, OK, I wouldn't say that. I mean, Qataris left the stadium early, but in pretty much most sports, the home team, if they're losing, the home fans will start to leave before the end of the game. So there's still two games to go for Qatar, but definitely Saudi Arabia achieving this historic result, possibly the only one, when you go back through World Cup history, really Algeria beating West Germany in the 70s, the United States beating England in America. Those are really the only other 2 results that you can draw comparison with. So this result's so big, not just for Saudi Arabia, but for the whole Arab world, including Qatar. So it will definitely have reignited interest, if indeed it did wane, in the World Cup.
Paul in the souk in Doha, thanks very much for updating us. More from you, of course, a little later. Thanks very much indeed. But back to politics here. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab could be in store for a grilling about his behaviour, going in front of a committee of MPs shortly. Just to remind you, he's being investigated after 2 formal complaints about alleged bullying of staff being made last week. Today, a fresh report that a top Whitehall official has had to apologise for his behaviour in a meeting. Our political correspondent Tom Harwood is joining us now in the studio. And Tom, number 10, indicating that this independent inquiry, which he launched himself, may go wider than just these 2 formal complaints.
Indeed, if, as and when they actually appoint someone to lead this inquiry.
And it actually starts, yes.
Which is one of the big questions. Of course, the number 10 is missing currently an ethics advisor after the resignation of Lord Geit under Boris Johnson. There's been a process to find a new ethics advisor. But this is a parallel process where number 10 are trying to find some independent individual to lead an investigation into what was initially going to be these 2 complaints, these 2 formal complaints against Dominic Raab.
Right, Tom, but now could well be others. Break away because I think he's actually started to appear at this committee. And he's just speaking to MPs. We'll just dip into
challenges. But my priority remains the same priorities that I've talked to you before about. In fact, I always carry them with me here. So we've got the legislative priorities, the Bill of Rights, and then there'll be a victims and prisoner bill, which will deal with our parole reform. Both of those are key legislative priorities. We have all the work that we're doing on prisons, both the prison build, but also the massive agenda now to get offenders off drugs through abstinence-based rehabilitation. I think that's one of the things that has really shifted since we last spoke. Also getting offenders into work, both a big step change in the approach of prisons, and I can talk a bit about that. Yep. That's showing up in the data for offenders getting into work. But also a lot more to do. And I would also add to the very top priorities, violence against women and the RASO agenda. Again, we've seen an increase by about 2/3 of convictions over the last year, but a lot more for us to do. Those I would say illustrative example of the very top priorities.
Well, that's very helpful too. And let's touch upon the financial situation briefly, if we might. The autumn statement doesn't change the department's budget, but it does mean that you're going to have to absorb the inflation costs within the existing sum. What do you think the impact is going to be of that on services?
So I haven't done the specific allocations, but I think it was timely and useful to start with the priorities, because that tells you the areas that I'll want to protect and safeguard as a priority. The overall departmental spending bearing in mind we're an unprotected department, the overall departmental spending will grow at an average of 3.7% per year over the SR period. We'll have to find the efficiency savings to manage the inflationary pressures, and of course that is not known precisely at the moment either. After the SR period, the day-to-day spending will continue to grow in real terms, but more slowly than previously planned, at 1% a year in real terms until 2027, 2028. The capital spend will increase as planned for the next 2 years, and then maintained in cash terms for the following 3 years. And I'll need to do the allocations. Look, we're going to have to find some savings to absorb the inflationary pressures, but I'm confident that we can do it in a way that protects our core priorities.
Okay. Do you have a sense yet as to where those savings might be, or is it too early to say?
Well, I can't give you... what I tend to do is, rather than say some people do a sort of percentage slice across the board, I'm not going to do that. I didn't do it when I was Foreign Secretary with the ODA budget. What I would much rather do is set out the core priorities that I want to minimise the impact and safeguard and prioritise, and then see what the choices are. So the allocations process is very important for us, but I'm confident that we've got enough flexibility in the overall budget to keep driving forward what is an ambitious reform agenda.
Do you think the capital programme will be adequate to deal with, for example, pressures on the condition of the courts and the prisons and so on?
Well, I always make the argument that if you don't make sure that you've got the provision in place for that, it's a false economy anyway because you lose sitting days in prison. You lose prison places. I mean, that's ultimately what happens. They fall out. So, look, it's going to be a challenge overall, but I'm confident we'll do that. And of course, we have a substantial prison build agenda going forward. That's obviously been unsettled by the inflationary impacts, not just on our spend, but on contractors and things like that. But I'm still confident if you look at, if you look at the progress we've already made, Five Wells, Foss Way, H&P Full Sutton, major refurbishments at H&P Birmingham, H&P Liverpool, a house block at H&P Stockton. So over 3,000, I think it's 3,100 places have already been delivered. We'll keep driving that forward.
Turning to the position, of course.
Committee, the Justice Committee, Tom's going to explain to us what's going on, because of course there were justice questions in the Commons. We were thinking that perhaps there'll be Labour questions coming up on his conduct, because as we were indicating, we now believe that the independent inquiry, once it gets underway, will look beyond two formal allegations, particularly as we now have another indication that an apology had to be made for either his behaviour or his language.
Yes, well, let's roll back a little bit and look at the context in which we're looking, because there were, until last week, no formal complaints lodged against the Justice Secretary. On Wednesday last week, it was revealed in the 2-hour period before Deputy Prime Minister's questions, as it was then, before Dominic Raab was to stand up at the dispatch box and answer questions from Angela Rayner, as well as a whole host of MPs across the House, of course, deputising for the Prime Minister. He revealed that 2 complaints from 2 different times of his different tenures, once as Justice Secretary and once as Foreign Secretary, 2 different complaints had been lodged at the same time. Perhaps him focusing on the fact that they'd been lodged at the same time might have been a hint towards something more political going on there. But in any case, he referred himself then to the Prime Minister for an independent investigation. The Prime Minister agreed to that investigation and said he will appoint an independent investigator who then will have the scope to set out what the terms of this investigation are. That will be agreed between this investigator and the Prime Minister. And ultimately, the Prime Minister will be the arbiter of that process. But there hasn't yet been an investigator appointed. It's a tricky process. Number 10 has been trying to do it for the last week. There are some hints it's getting to the end of that process. We may well have an appointment as soon as today, perhaps by the end of this week. And then the terms of reference are set out.
And then all the evidence, so it's going to be a long process. However, I mean, we ought to point out that the allegations are not from opposition politicians in terms of the politics of it. They are from, as we understand it, civil servants and staff members. And that's why this is so difficult for the Justice Minister. It's from those who say that there was language, bullying behaviour, even allegations of tomatoes being thrown across the room.
Well, this is the really tricky thing about it all, because these confidential complaints are not known to the public by their very nature. All we have is one anecdote about a tomato being thrown, which is rather comical. It was referenced by Angela Rayner at Deputy Prime Minister's questions last week. And then there's also a general complaint about the tone in which he spoke. And there's one or other allegation that junior members of staff had to be with senior members of staff if they were in a meeting with him. Now, all of this seems a bit fuzzy and a bit vague. And perhaps one of the things that Dominic Raab himself is hoping, that an independent investigation will be able to look beyond the sort of vague tone of the whole affair at the actual specific complaint. And was there anything that could be termed as bullying, or is this just a rather demanding Secretary of State making sure that his civil servants work?
However, there is the additional point, and we saw this with Gavin Williamson, where he said that he become a distraction. When they become the story rather than the job they do, it becomes very difficult for them to maintain their position, doesn't it?
It certainly does. I don't think we're quite at that stage with Dominic Raab yet. Perhaps the questions from Bob Neal there on the committee would point towards the fact that this is not yet this big, overwhelming issue.
To do,
He's still got the job to do. He's talking about all the different things, and not least the bill Bill of Rights, which has been revived after it was quashed by the Truss administration. There's lots of things that are going on in the Justice Department, and it doesn't seem that this is the overriding thing. Of course, it's humming in the background. Angela Rayner used one question on it at Deputy Prime Minister's Questions last week, but ultimately there were 5 others.
Yeah, indeed. And Dominic Raab at Justice Questions in the Commons saying he's confident the Bill of Rights will receive overwhelming support during its second reading. So he's still in the job doing what he needs to do. Tom, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Now, we're just talking earlier about MPs' expenses with the ability to claim their office party or the Christmas do on expenses, MPs' expenses paid by the taxpayer, of course. Chris Heaton-Harris saying he didn't think any MPs would actually be taking up that offer because, of course, in this lead up to Christmas, many of us worried about the rising costs of living with the price of Christmas food and gifts for loved ones. But let's just tell you that a Belfast Christmas market, traders there hoping people can still get into the spirit of the season, as Dougie Beattie has been finding out for us.
Sights and smells that signal Christmas is on its way. But even the councils are counting their pennies and hoping that the retailers are going to recover from the lockdown restrictions that kept revenue down. Over the next couple of weekends, Christmas tree lights will be lit across the UK. Here in Belfast, it was a very low-key ceremony in order to keep costs down. The 18th annual Christmas market is now well underway. It brings millions into the local economy, as it's one of only 2 on the island of Ireland. Traders here are hoping that the cost of living doesn't bite just so tight.
Oh, we love Belfast. It's amazing. It's the first time we've been here. We've never been to Belfast before. We've never traded here. The people are super friendly and the city is super clean.
Cheryl Rudman is a South African who is hoping that her culinary delights may catch on in the Belfast market.
Of course, the cost of living is getting so expensive. People sometimes feel that they might splash out a little bit more on smaller things, and just give themselves a bit of joy by walking around, having something different to eat, eating out, every 3rd night or 4th night and popping down to the market, to see what it's about. We have something here called bunny chow, which is literally a loaf of bread, half a loaf, which scoop out the middle, the inside, and then we stuff it full of curry. That's in South Africa. There's a province, Durban, and that's mainly a Durban dish type of style.
Abdul Shafarnas has traded here for many years and says that they are keeping prices down and people are still buying.
Honestly, it's not affecting people. We're trying ourselves as well not to put the prices up, even though this is handcrafted, but we're taking into consideration what's going on. We have to help each other.
The market is an attraction that brings footfall into Belfast, and the city will be anxious to keep shoppers there. But the rising energy costs have seen downscaling of lights throughout the area, and retailers are hopeful that the Christmas feeling doesn't dim. Dougie Beattie, GB News, Belfast.
Well, some Christmas lights still shine there at least. Now, from Belfast back to London, where the King is hosting his first state visit as monarch, welcoming the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa to the UK. Well, King Charles and Camilla Queen Consort are currently hosting a lunch, an informal lunch, we're told, at Buckingham Palace, but a big state banquet tonight, all part of the President's 2-day trip. Well, the President was welcomed with a ceremonial guard of honour by the Coldstream Guards at Horse Guards Parade. 200 horses, 1,000 soldiers led by No. 7 Company taking part in that parade. Gun salutes echoing across Green Park. Let's get more with our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, who's outside Buckingham Palace for us. And Cameron, this was a first, of course, for the new King, King Charles, but also, to remind people, the first state visit, I think, since 2019 because of all the COVID restrictions.
Indeed, Mark, it was President Trump back in 2019 that was hosted by the late Queen Elizabeth II, but now it's King Charles III's time to host a state visit to the United Kingdom for the first time as sovereign. Of course, it's the royal family's power of soft diplomacy in action, building on ties between the United Kingdom and South Africa. Now, in the last few minutes, it appears that President Cyril Ramaphosa has left Buckingham Palace with a police escort, who presumably is travelling towards Westminster Abbey, because because that is his next engagement. He will be laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior, and he will also be looking at the memorial stone to the former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. As I said, it's the first time the King has hosted his state visit here to the United Kingdom from South Africa. It all started with a big ceremonial welcome at Horse Guards Parade, where the South Africa national anthem was played. More than 1,000 soldiers took part in that procession, and 230 horses. There were gun salutes in Green Park and at the Tower of London. 41 gun salutes in Green Park. It was the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery that fired them. There was also an inspection of the Guard of Honour, the number 7 Coldstream Guards, with the King and the South African president inspecting those troops. And then there was a big carriage procession involving the Irish state coach and the Australian state coach and the Prince and Princess of Wales and Queen Consort in a procession up the Mall towards Buckingham Palace, where a private lunch took place this afternoon. And then this evening, there is expected to be a huge state banquet involving 150 guests, members of the royal family, yes, but also politicians. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is expected to be among the guest list. And then tomorrow, that's when the work begins between the South African president and the British government. Of course, it's the Foreign Office that actually organises and invites foreign heads of state to attend state visits to the United Kingdom. It's all about building ties and trade ties specifically, and there is expected to be a bilateral meeting in number 10 Downing Street tomorrow.
So a lot going on behind you in Buckingham Palace, but you were indicating the president didn't stay there because of the renovation work going on. He was at a nearby hotel. Quite interesting that it was the Prince and Princess of Wales who undertook the duty of collecting him there and taking him to Horse Guards, indicating how important William and Kate are to this new king in terms of this way forward.
Indeed, it's certainly showing a continuation of the monarchy. As you said, Mark, the president is staying in a luxury hotel somewhere in London due to the Buckingham Palace resurfacing project, which is taking place. It's about 5 years into its 10-year refurbishment programme, so it wouldn't be appropriate for him to stay here. The King himself isn't even staying at Buckingham Palace at the moment. He's very much staying in Clarence House still as his London residence. But in terms of the Prince and Princess of Wales, they are the future King and Queen consorts. They also travelled in that carriage procession, which I mentioned dozens of times when King Charles was Prince of Wales. He actually travelled in the carriage procession, the Australian state coach, behind the Queen when she was hosting the late Queen, when she was hosting a foreign leader. And now it's his turn to be in the front, leading the procession, and it's the Prince and Princess of Wales' turn to be part of that and be part of that welcome by the royal family. So in time, of course, they will be hosting state visits, but it's all about showing that continuation of the monarchy and building those ties in the early stages, so that when the time comes for the Prince and Princess of Wales to be king and queen, those relationships are already there and already strong.
Cameron at Buckingham Palace, thanks for updating us. And, of course, more to come, as you say, a 2-day visit. So we'll reflect on what's happening tomorrow as well. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. Now, as we've been reporting, MPs able to claim their expenses for festive celebrations, Christmas parties to you and me, for the first time. That's according to advice from the expenses watchdog. But they can't do so for alcohol, but food and refreshments, perhaps decorations too. Yes, they're all allowed, it seems. UK taxpayers funding those festivities. Well, to debate the rights and wrongs now, joining us, Elliot Keck, who's Investigations Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, and Matthew Lesh, who's Head of Public Policy at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you both for joining us, gentlemen. Matthew, first to you. I think you're thinking that the Christmas spirit should be part of our celebrations this year, and MP should be part of that as well?
Yeah, I think there's nothing particularly unusual or weird about an organisation having a Christmas party. I'm sure GBNews has a Christmas party, mine has a Christmas party. Those are paid for by the organisations. This is a tiny amount of expenditure to ensure that staff have a better experience of working in Parliament, to make sure that they're thanked for all their efforts. I think it's very Grinch-like behaviour to say that MPs shouldn't be able to have Christmas parties. And if anything, I think it's a bit disappointing that they can't expense alcohol. I think that's a bit puritanical of IPSO and of the government authorities when it comes to what people are allowed to drink at their office Christmas party.
The trouble is, it's our money. We're picking up the tab. Is not that the case, Elliot?
I think that's absolutely the case. And MPs effectively can subsidise alcohol and effectively can subsidise their Christmas dinner. We have an enormous subsidy, about £17 million over the last 3 years for the parliamentary canteens, where you can get an excellent Christmas dinner, you can get cheap wine, cheap champagne. And I think, that is more than enough to begin with for this year.
Yeah, and the policy, of course, of being able to claim expenses has been in place for some time. But I think the latest estimate for this year alone was 139 million, which obviously is a lot of sausage rolls. What would you say, Matthew, to those members of the public that can't even afford to get their own Christmas party or Christmas lunch, given this time of austerity?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of people are struggling, and that's important to acknowledge. It's worth, though, putting the context properly in terms of expenses. Now, the vast majority of expenses for MPs go on things like offices, ensuring that their staff are paid so they can respond to constituent inquiries, they can research and scrutinise legislation, and ensure that their MP is well informed about the state of the world. The total amount the government spends on expenses for MPs and on MPs is about 0.01% of the total government expenditure. This is not breaking the bank in terms of taxpayers, and I think it's actually a very important function. If anything, we probably underpay MPs and underpay MP staffs. I know that's not particularly popular to say, but if you want quality MPs, you want to attract good people, you've got to pay them well. And if you want MPs to not just have to deal with typically some 21-year-old researcher straight out of university who they leave a few years later because they can't promote them and pay them better.
Okay.
I think we probably do need more money for MPs and more money for their staff.
What about that point, Elliot, that perhaps it oils the wheels of power?
Well, I'm not sure that some Scotch eggs and some sausage rolls from a local Tesco is really going to incentivise parliamentary staff to stay on for an extra couple of years. I think there's a lot of excellent perks to working in Parliament. You get invited to a huge range of receptions with excellent food and drink, particularly at Christmas time. The pay is not as harsh as Matthew suggests. Parliamentary staff can be paid up to around £50,000. So I think there is pretty good pay there. They have a significant perks of being able to eat and drink on the cheap, taxpayer funded. But I think the key question is to go back to this Christmas party point. This is the first year that MPs have been allowed to do this, and you have to ask a question, given the autumn statement we've just seen, very Grinch-like autumn statement, why this year of all years should taxpayers be funding Christmas parties?
Indeed. And the other aspect, Matthew, is it comes off the back of Partygate, with people still smarting on that when we were all locked down, and those in number 10 particularly were whining and dining and pretending that maybe the rules don't apply to them.
No, look, I think the fundamental issue with Partygate was that the government made one set of rules for themselves, and then they told everyone else to follow a different set of rules and broke the law in the process, and were issued fines accordingly. The issue is not with the idea of having celebratory events at work. I think that's a pretty standard workplace idea. It's not hugely expensive. All this money is already allocated anyway for MPs' expenses. It's just about whether or not it's used for a Christmas party or whether or not it's used for something else.
On that very point, I have to ask you, what are the Institute for Economic Affairs planning for its Christmas bash? Do you know yet?
That's a good question. I think we have an annual Christmas lunch. It's my first year at the IEA for Christmas. Unfortunately, I missed out on last year's Christmas lunch because I managed to come down with COVID on that specific day. What about you? What are GB News' Christmas plans?
Well, we have a party. We don't know where it is or what it is yet, but I have to put that question as well to the Taxpayers Alliance. Elliot, is it sackcloth and ashes for you?
We're having a takeaway in the office and then some Christmas games.
Right.
I don't think
enjoy.
I'll be invited to the TPA Christmas party at this rate, unfortunately.
OK, perhaps you can go to each other's parties and enjoy. We shall see. Gentlemen, thank you both and have a Merry Christmas. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's reflect some of your views. First of all, Michelle's been in touch. Nothing wrong with MPs having Christmas parties, provided they pay for it themselves from their own salaries. And it is not, she said, in capital letters, funded by taxpayers' money, exclamation mark. on Keir Starmer's CBI speech. This from John in Leeds. It's a bit rich that Starmer's talking about cheap foreign labour coming from the party of Tony Blair, who imported low-pay, unskilled labour by the million. On the pension protests at the DWP, Jackie says, why should UK taxpayers keep funding pensioners abroad? They are not a priority. Well, I think actually the case is they pay their own national insurance. That's the point, Jackie. So they are entitled to the state pension. Anyway, those are the views so far. Thank you for getting in touch. As ever, it is gbviews@gbnews.uk. Patrick coming up next, and I'm sure he'll be outlining what we are indeed going to have at our Christmas party. Join us again tomorrow, back at 12.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Following such a soggy day yesterday for many of us, there'll still be some showers around today, along with a lot of cloud. But for many, actually, it is a drier and eventually a brighter day, although the legacy of yesterday's rain still with us. Low pressure across southern parts of the UK, weather fronts wrapped around that. These are weakening fronts, still providing a lot of low cloud for eastern England, some drizzly bits and pieces, and quite frequent showers into eastern and northern Scotland, even longer spells of rain here. Also some showers pushing into southwest England, parts of Pembrokeshire. But in between, actually, for many, it's a drier day with some sunshine coming through across western areas later on. But it's also going to feel on the cold side, 9 to 11 Celsius. Temperatures a little below average for the time of year. The winds pick up across the far north, Shetland in particular, along with some heavy spells of rain overnight, gales here. But elsewhere, clearing skies, lighter winds and a frost forming, especially across eastern areas, with temperatures in towns and cities down to 2 or 3 Celsius, in the countryside down below 0. But in the west, well, it's not a cold start because here we've got wind and rain pushing through quite quickly. The band of rain actually moves swiftly across England and Wales during the morning, as well as Northern Ireland, pushes into Scotland by lunchtime, and then it comes to a rest across northern